In the year 610, the world was dominated by two great empires, trapped in an endless war. The Byzantine Empire controlled the ancient cities of Constantinople, Damascus, and Jerusalem. To the east, the mighty Sasanian Empire reigned from Persia, with its armies clashing across the deserts of Mesopotamia. Between these superpowers stretched an inhospitable peninsula that neither empire bothered to conquer, Arabia. Here, proud Bedouin clans roamed infinite deserts, following ancient codes of honor and blood vengeance. At the crossroads of this forgotten land stood Mecca, a trading city built around a sacred black stone that housed 360 deities. It was here, in a cave high above this desert trading outpost, that a single revelation would ignite a transformation more dramatic than any military conquest. Within a century, the armies of Arabia would shatter both the Byzantine and Sasanian empires. Within 2 centuries, a new civilization would stretch from Spain to India. This is the story of Islam, how a merchant's vision in the Arabian desert became a force capable of reshaping 3 continents, preserving the wisdom of ancient Greece, advancing the frontiers of science, and creating architectural marvels that still inspire wonder today. From the lightning conquests of the early caliphs to the Golden Age of Baghdad, from the Crusades to the Ottoman Empire, from the Colonial challenge to modern struggles, this is the entire history of Islam, 14 centuries in the making. Today, as several European nations face social tensions and identity crises, as protests emerge from both Muslim communities seeking recognition and native populations eager to preserve their traditions, understanding Islam's complex history becomes essential. This ancient story continues to shape our modern world in ways both profound and controversial. To truly comprehend this story, we must start from the very beginning. In 570 CE, the Arabian Peninsula was a land caught between empires. The Byzantines controlled Syria and Palestine. The Sasanians ruled Persia and Mesopotamia. Between them lay a harsh desert, inhabited by Bedouin tribes who knew no master but the unforgiving sun. At the crossroads of this world stood Mecca, wealthy from caravan trade connecting India and China with Europe and Africa. But Mecca was more than a trading post. It was a sacred sanctuary, home to the Kaaba, housing 360 idols representing the gods of Arabia's many tribes. This was the year of the elephant. Abraha, the Christian ruler of Yemen, marched north with war elephants to destroy the Kaaba and force Arabian pilgrims to worship at his cathedral. But as his army approached Mecca, the elephants refused to advance. Flocks of birds descended carrying stones that decimated the invading force. The Meccans believed their gods had protected them. It was in this miraculous year that a child was born who would change the world forever. His name was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, but he would never know his father. Abdullah had died on a trading expedition, leaving behind a pregnant wife and modest inheritance. Following Meccan custom, the infant Muhammad was sent to live with Bedouins in the desert. His foster mother, Halima, would later claim that from the moment she took the child, her flocks grew fat and her camels gave abundant milk. But tragedy would soon shatter the boy's world. When Muhammad was 6, his mother Amina died while visiting his father's grave. The orphan child was taken in by his grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib, keeper of the sacred Zamzam well. But when Muhammad was 8, his grandfather too passed away, leaving him in the care of his uncle, Abu Talib. Under Abu Talib's protection, Muhammad learned the ways of the desert. As he grew into manhood, he developed a reputation throughout Mecca as Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. In a society where tribal loyalties often trumped honesty, Muhammad stood apart. He never lied, never broke a promise, never took advantage of the weak. When disputes arose between tribes, they would ask Muhammad to arbitrate. When the Kaaba needed rebuilding after flood damage, the tribes quarrelled over who would place the sacred black stone. Muhammad solved the crisis by placing the stone on a cloak and having representatives from each tribe lift it together, then guiding it into place himself. It was this reputation that brought Muhammad to the attention of Khadija bint Khuwaylid, one of Mecca's wealthiest merchants. Twice widowed, she had built a trading empire stretching from Syria to Yemen. She hired the 25-year-old Muhammad to lead a caravan to Damascus. The journey was a remarkable success, but more impressive than his commercial skill was Muhammad's character. When Khadija, at 40, proposed marriage through a mutual friend, Muhammad accepted gladly. Their wedding defied social conventions, an older, wealthy widow choosing a younger man of modest means. But it was also a love story that would become one of history's most enduring partnerships. For 15 years, Muhammad lived as a prosperous merchant, blessed with a loving family. Khadija bore him 4 daughters and 2 sons who died in infancy. But as he entered his 30s, a restlessness grew within him. Mecca's prosperity had brought corruption and inequality. The wealthy lived in luxury while the poor struggled. Tribal warfare claimed lives over matters of honor. The sacred pilgrimage had become commercialized. Muhammad began withdrawing to a cave called Hira, high on Mount Nur, where he could look down upon the city and reflect on the spiritual emptiness around him. In the silence of the cave, he would meditate on the nature of existence, on the possibility of a single, all-powerful God who ruled the universe. These retreats became more frequent as Muhammad approached his 40th year. Khadija, understanding her husband's spiritual needs, would send food and water to sustain him. She never questioned his searching, recognizing that he sought something the material world could not provide. It was during Ramadan in 610 CE that Muhammad's life changed forever. He had been meditating in the cave for several days when, in the depths of night, he became aware of a presence of overwhelming power filling the cave. A voice commanded him, "Read!" Muhammad, who could neither read nor write, replied in terror, "I cannot read." The presence seized him, embracing him so tightly he felt his breath would be crushed. Again came the command, "Read!" Again Muhammad replied, "I cannot read." A third time the embrace came, more powerful than before, and then the voice spoke words that would echo through centuries. "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot of blood. Read, and your Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know." Muhammad stumbled down the mountainside, his mind reeling. He burst into his house, calling to Khadija, "Cover me, cover me." She wrapped him in a cloak and held him until his trembling subsided. When he told her what had happened, Khadija did not doubt. "Rejoice, O son of my uncle," she said. "By Allah, you will never be disgraced. You maintain family ties, help the poor, serve your guests generously, and assist those afflicted by calamity." The revelations continued. The messages spoke of Allah, the one eternal God who had created the heavens and earth. They called for justice for the poor, honesty in business, kindness to orphans and widows. They warned of a day of judgment when all would be held accountable. Muhammad began sharing these revelations with his closest family and friends. Khadija was the first to believe, followed by his young cousin Ali, his dear friend Abu Bakr, and his freed slave Zayd. For 3 years Muhammad preached quietly to those he trusted most. But the time for secrecy was ending. The revelations commanded him to warn your nearest kinsman. Muhammad climbed Mount Safa and called out in the traditional manner for summoning tribes in emergency. "O people of Mecca," he called, "if I told you an army was approaching from behind this hill, would you believe me?" "Yes," they replied, "for we have never known you to tell a lie." "Then I warn you of severe punishment that awaits you." "I am a warner before severe torment comes." He proclaimed the message revealed to him. There is only one God. The idols they worshipped were powerless, and all would be held accountable on the Day of Judgment. The reaction was swift and hostile. Abu Lahab, Muhammad's own uncle, shouted, "May you perish! Did you gather us only for this?" Many mocked and jeered, but some listened with open hearts, and slowly the message began to spread. The Quraysh leaders saw Muhammad's message as a direct threat. If there was only one God, what would happen to the pilgrims who came to worship 360 idols? Abu Jahl became Muhammad's fiercest opponent, organizing systematic persecution against the new Muslims. Those without tribal protection suffered most. Bilal ibn Rabah, an Ethiopian slave, was tortured by his master, who would drag him into the desert and place a heavy stone on his chest, demanding he renounce his faith. But Bilal would only repeat, "Ahad, Ahad, 1-1. When Abu Bakr heard of Bilal's suffering, he purchased and freed him. Bilal would become Islam's first muezzin, his beautiful voice calling the faithful to prayer. As persecution intensified, Muhammad advised some followers to seek refuge in Abyssinia, where the Christian king was known for justice. 83 Muslims made the dangerous journey across the Red Sea. When Meccan envoys demanded their return, the Abyssinian king refused after hearing the Muslims explain their beliefs. The Quraysh imposed a complete boycott on Muhammad's clan, forbidding trade, marriage, or even speaking to them. The boycott lasted 3 years, during which the Muslims faced severe hardship. It finally ended when several Meccan leaders, moved by compassion, tore up the agreement. But 619 CE became the year of sorrow. First, beloved Khadijah fell ill and died. For 24 years, she had been Muhammad's closest friend, business partner, and most trusted advisor. Shortly after, Abu Talib also passed away, leaving Muhammad without tribal protection. Desperate to find new allies, Muhammad travelled to Taif, a mountain city southeast of Mecca. But the leaders not only rejected his message, but mocked him cruelly, inciting children to chase him through the streets with stones. Muhammad took refuge in a garden, his feet bleeding, and prayed to Allah for strength. During this dark period, Muhammad experienced the Isra and Mi'raj, the night journey and ascension. According to Islamic tradition, he was transported from Mecca to Jerusalem, where he led all previous prophets in prayer, then ascended through the 7 heavens to the presence of Allah himself. When Muhammad told the Meccans about his night journey, many mocked him even more. But Abu Bakr, when asked what he thought, replied simply, "If he said it, then it is true." Help came from an unexpected source. During the pilgrimage season of 620 CE, Muhammad encountered men from Yathrib, an oasis city 200 miles north. These men, familiar with monotheism through their Jewish neighbours, recognized Muhammad's message as the fulfillment of prophecy. 6 embraced Islam and promised to return with more of their people. The following year, 12 men from Yathrib took the first pledge of a Kaaba, promising to worship only Allah and obey Muhammad. In 622 CE, 73 men and 2 women took the second pledge, promising to protect Muhammad as they would their own families. As news of these meetings leaked, the Quraysh realized Muhammad was about to escape their control. They decided on assassination. To avoid blood revenge, 1 man from each tribe would participate, making vengeance impossible. But Muhammad was warned of the plot. On the night of September 20th, 622 CE, he asked his cousin Ali to sleep in his bed as a decoy while he slipped away to Abu Bakr's house. Together, they set out for Yathrib under cover of darkness. The 2 men travelled south initially to throw off pursuit, then took refuge in a cave called Thor. For 3 days, they remained hidden, while search parties scoured the area. According to tradition, a spider spun its web across the cave entrance, and a dove built its nest there, convincing searchers that no one could have entered recently. After the danger passed, Muhammad and Abu Bakr continued north. On September 24th, 622 CE, they reached Yathrib, where crowds of Muslims had been eagerly awaiting their arrival. The Hijra, the migration from Mecca to Yathrib, marked a turning point in Muhammad's life and world history. The year 622 CE became the first year of the Islamic calendar. Yathrib was renamed Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina. The trustworthy one had become an exile, driven from his birthplace by those who could not accept his message. But in leaving Mecca, Muhammad was not retreating. He was advancing toward a destiny that would see the birth of a new civilization. The age of prophecy was ending, and the age of the Islamic State was about to begin. The city that welcomed Muhammad was unlike Mecca in every way. Where Mecca was dominated by the powerful Quraysh tribe, Yathrib was home to a complex mix of Arab and Jewish tribes, locked in bitter warfare for generations. The two main Arab tribes, the Aus and Khazraj, had been fighting for over a century. Their endless feuding had weakened both groups and left the city's three Jewish tribes in positions of considerable influence. This fractured situation created an opportunity for Muhammad. The people of Yathrib were exhausted by decades of warfare and desperately needed a leader who could unite the warring factions. The message of Islam, with its emphasis on brotherhood transcending tribal boundaries, offered hope for peace. Muhammad's first act was to establish a new kind of community, the Ummah. This was not merely a religious congregation, but a political and social entity that would govern relationships between all inhabitants, Muslim and non-Muslim alike. The foundation was laid in the Constitution of Medina, perhaps the world's first written charter of human rights and religious freedom. The Constitution declared that all inhabitants, whether Muhajirun emigrants from Mecca, Ansar local converts, or members of Jewish tribes, were part of a single community with mutual obligations. The Jews who follow us belong to our community, it stated. They have the same rights as we have. It guaranteed religious freedom. The Jews have their religion, and the Muslims have theirs. Most revolutionary of all, it established Muhammad not merely as a religious leader, but as the final arbiter of disputes. In a society where tribal law had reigned supreme, this represented a fundamental shift toward divine guidance rather than ancestral custom. Muhammad established brotherhood bonds between the Muhajirun and Ansar. Each emigrant was paired with a local supporter, creating relationships that went beyond hospitality. Sa'd ibn al-Rabi welcomed his assigned brother, Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf, with extraordinary generosity. "I will divide my wealth in half between us, and I have 2 wives. Choose whichever you prefer." But Abd al-Rahman replied, "Just show me the way to the market." Within months, through his own efforts, he had become prosperous enough to host a wedding feast for the entire community. But the establishment of the Islamic State did not go unnoticed in Mecca. The Quraysh recognized that Muhammad's success posed a direct threat to their power. If other tribes embraced Islam, the traditional system keeping them in control could collapse entirely. The first major confrontation came in 624 CE. Muhammad learned that a large Meccan caravan, led by Abu Sufyan, was returning from Syria, laden with goods worth 50,000 dinars. Muhammad decided to intercept this caravan to weaken Mecca economically and provide resources for his community. But Abu Sufyan suspected such an attempt and sent a messenger to Mecca requesting military protection. Abu Jahl saw this as an opportunity to crush the Muslim community once and for all. "We will not return until we have been to Badr," he declared, "where we will feast for 3 days, and the Arab tribes will hear of our expedition and continue to respect us forever." He assembled nearly 1,000 men, the largest military force Mecca had ever fielded. When Muhammad learned a Meccan army was marching toward Badr, he faced a crucial decision. He had set out with only 313 men to intercept a caravan, but now confronted a vastly superior force. Many urged retreat, but Sa'd ibn Mu'adh of the Ansar declared, "O Messenger of Allah, we believe in you. We have given our word to hear and obey, so go where you wish, we are with you." By Allah, if you asked us to cross the sea, we would plunge into it with you. On March 13, 624 CE, the armies faced each other at Barda. The contrast was stark. The Meccans were well equipped and confident. The Muslims were smaller, poorly equipped, and included many who had never fought in major battle. The battle began with single combat. Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, Muhammad's uncle, killed his opponent with a single blow. Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ubaidah ibn al-Harith also emerged victorious, giving the Muslims early psychological advantage. When general battle commenced, the Muslims fought with desperation, born of absolute faith. As the battle reached its climax, a sandstorm arose, blowing into the Meccans' faces. The Muslims pressed their advantage. Abu Jahl was killed by two young men who had sworn to avenge persecution of their fellow Muslims. With his death, Meccan resistance collapsed. The Battle of Barda ended in complete Muslim victory. 70 Meccans were killed, 70 taken prisoner. Muslim losses were minimal. Only 14 men died. Throughout Arabia, tribes suddenly took notice. Here was a small community that had defeated the peninsula's most powerful force. But success brought new challenges. The Jewish tribes of Medina, who had initially welcomed Muhammad, began viewing the growing Muslim power with suspicion. The Banu Qaynuqa were the first to openly challenge Muhammad's authority after a marketplace incident escalated into warfare. After a 15-day siege, they surrendered and were expelled from Medina with their personal possessions. Meanwhile, the Meccans planned revenge. Abu Sufyan spent a year preparing a massive assault. 3,000 men, including 700 in armour and 200 cavalry. The army included women led by Hind bint Utbah, whose father had died at Barda, to encourage their men with war chants. When this massive force approached, Muhammad initially favoured defensive strategy, but younger Muslims demanded they march out to meet the enemy. On March 23, 625 CE, 700 Muslims took positions on Mount Uhud's slopes. Muhammad positioned 50 archers on a hill with strict orders never to leave their posts. The initial Muslim charge broke Meccan lines, and victory seemed certain. But as Meccans began retreating, many Muslims broke ranks to pursue them and collect booty. Most archers abandoned their positions despite explicit orders. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the brilliant Meccan cavalry commander, saw the opportunity immediately. He led his horsemen around the undefended hill and attacked from behind. The Muslims found themselves surrounded and fighting for their lives. Muhammad himself was wounded. A stone struck his face, breaking a tooth. For a terrifying moment, rumours spread that the Prophet had been killed. But Muhammad continued encouraging his followers. How can a people prosper who have wounded their Prophet? Oh Allah, forgive my people, for they know not what they do. Uhud ended in tactical victory for Mecca, but strategic stalemate. The Meccans inflicted heavy casualties. 70 Muslims died, including beloved Hamza, whose body was mutilated by Hind in revenge. But the Meccan army was too exhausted to attack Medina itself. The defeat was sobering for the Muslim community. It demonstrated that victory was not guaranteed, that success required discipline and obedience. But it also showed Islamic State resilience. Despite heavy casualties, the Muslims did not collapse. In the aftermath, the Banu Nadir were accused of plotting to assassinate Muhammad. After several weeks' siege, they agreed to leave Medina, taking whatever they could carry. Many loaded their camels with wooden doors and window frames rather than leave them for Muslims. The most serious threat came in 627 CE, when a coalition assembled the largest army ever seen in Arabia. The Meccans joined with the Ghatafan Confederation, exiled Banu Nadir, and other tribes to field 10,000 men. This massive force, known as the Confederates, marched on Medina, intending to destroy the Muslim community once and for all. Faced with overwhelming odds, Muhammad adopted defensive strategy, suggested by Salman al-Farisi, a Persian convert experienced in siege warfare. The Muslims dug a deep trench around Medina's northern approaches, creating an obstacle Confederate cavalry could not cross. The siege of the trench lasted nearly a month. The Confederates, expecting quick victory, found themselves unable to break Muslim defences. As the siege dragged on, the alliance began fracturing. Different tribes had their own agendas, and harsh winter weather made the situation increasingly uncomfortable. The crisis peaked when the Banu Qurayza, Medina's last Jewish tribe, entered secret negotiations with the Confederates. If they opened a second front from within the city, the Muslims would face certain destruction. But Muhammad's intelligence network discovered the plot. He sent negotiators to sow discord among Confederate tribes while a fierce winter storm struck their camp, overturning tents and scattering fires. On the storm's night, Abu Sufyan decided to withdraw. "This is not a place to stay," he announced. "The horses and camels are dying. The Banu Qurayza have broken their agreement, and we have heard disturbing reports. Depart, for I am departing." The Confederate army melted away in darkness, ending the greatest threat the Islamic State had faced. But victory came at a price. The Banu Qurayza, who had negotiated with the Confederates during the siege, now faced Muhammad's judgment. After 25 days' siege, they surrendered unconditionally. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, mortally wounded during the siege, was appointed to decide their fate. He pronounced harsh sentence. The men would be executed, women and children enslaved. Between 600 and 800 men were killed in a single day, a decision that would be debated for centuries. With internal threats eliminated and the Confederate siege's failure, the balance of power in Arabia shifted decisively toward Medina. Tribes throughout the peninsula began reconsidering their positions. The Muslims had survived 3 major attempts at destruction, and their resilience was becoming legendary. In 628 CE, Muhammad made a surprising decision. He announced his intention to perform pilgrimage to Mecca, the same ritual that had brought pilgrims to the Kaaba for centuries. 1,400 Muslims accompanied him, dressed in simple white garments and carrying only travellers' swords. The Meccans were confused. They could not attack pilgrims without violating sacred customs, but they could not allow Muhammad to enter Mecca and perform rituals that might legitimize his claims. The sides met at Hudaybiyah, just outside Mecca's sacred territory. After tense negotiations, they reached the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The Muslims would return without performing pilgrimage that year, but could come back the following year. A 10-year truce would be established. Many Muslims were disappointed. Umar ibn al-Khattab questioned the agreement. "Are we not Muslims? Are they not polytheists? Why should we accept humiliation?" But Muhammad understood the treaty's strategic value. The 10-year truce would allow Islam to spread peacefully throughout Arabia, as tribes would no longer fear Meccan retaliation for converting. The agreement also recognized the Islamic State as Mecca's equal partner. The treaty's wisdom became apparent within months. Tribes throughout Arabia began sending delegations to Medina. Even Mecca's greatest warriors began converting. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the cavalry commander who had turned the tide at Uhud, embraced Islam in 629 CE, followed by Amr ibn al-As, one of Arabia's most skilled diplomats. In 629 CE, Muhammad fulfilled the treaty by leading 2,000 Muslims on pilgrimage to Mecca. The Meccans evacuated for 3 days, watching from surrounding hills as Muslims performed ancient rituals around the Kaaba. The sight of peaceful worship had profound impact on many Meccans. The final confrontation came in 630 CE, when the Banu Bakr tribe, Meccan allies, attacked the Khuzar tribe, Muslim allies, in sacred territory. When Mecca refused to disavow this attack, Muhammad declared the treaty void. The Muslim army that marched on Mecca in January 630 CE was unlike any force assembled in Arabia. 10,000 men from dozens of tribes converged on the holy city, united by shared faith. The army was so large and well organized that resistance seemed futile. Abu Sufyan rode out to meet Muhammad before the army reached Mecca. In a conversation remembered for centuries, the former Meccan leader finally acknowledged the undeniable. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." Muhammad's entry into Mecca was a moment of supreme triumph, but also remarkable magnanimity. He could have ordered massacre, destruction, and enslavement, the custom of Arabian warfare. Instead, he proclaimed general amnesty. "Go your way, for you are free." Muhammad's first act was destroying the 360 idols surrounding the Kaaba. As each statue fell, he recited, "Truth has come, and falsehood has vanished." Indeed, falsehood is bound to vanish. The ancient sanctuary was purified and rededicated to worshipping the one true God. The conquest of Mecca marked the effective end of organised opposition to Islam in Arabia. Tribes throughout the peninsula sent delegations to announce conversion and pledge allegiance. The year 630 CE became known as the Year of Delegations. In March 632 CE, Muhammad led his final pilgrimage to Mecca, accompanied by over 100,000 Muslims. On the plain of Arafat, he delivered his farewell sermon. "O people, your blood and property are sacred until you meet your Lord. All mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab, except by piety and good action. Every Muslim is a brother to every Muslim. I leave behind two things, the Quran and the Sunnah. If you follow these, you will never go astray." As he concluded, Muhammad asked, "Have I fulfilled my mission?" The response thundered, "Yes, you have." Muhammad raised his hands, "O Allah, bear witness." 3 months later, Muhammad fell ill with fever. On June 8, 632 CE, as he lay in Aisha's arms, Muhammad ibn Abdullah breathed his last. His final words were, "O Allah, forgive me and have mercy on me and join me with the highest companions in paradise." The death sent shockwaves through the Muslim community. Many could not believe the man who had seemed invincible could simply die. Abu Bakr restored calm. "Whoever worshipped Muhammad, let him know that Muhammad is dead. But whoever worshipped Allah, let him know that Allah is alive and will never die." The question now facing the community was fundamental. Who would lead them after the Prophet's death? At a hastily convened meeting in the Saqifah, Abu Bakr was chosen as the first caliph, successor to the Messenger of Allah. But not everyone accepted his leadership, and this disagreement would eventually lead to the Great Schism between Sunni and Shia Islam. In 22 years, Muhammad had transformed from persecuted preacher to undisputed leader of Arabia. The revelation that began in a cave above Mecca had become the foundation of a new civilization. But the greatest test was yet to come. Could a faith built around one man's vision survive and flourish after his death? The answer would determine not just Arabia's fate, but the course of world history. The death of Muhammad in 632 CE sent shockwaves far beyond Arabia's borders. In Constantinople and Ctesiphon, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius and Sasanian King Yazdegerd III received reports of the Prophet's passing with relief and curiosity. For decades, these superpowers had exhausted themselves in endless warfare, draining treasuries and decimating armies in conflicts that gained neither side decisive advantage. But the reports spoke of something unprecedented. The desert tribes had been united under a single leader who claimed to speak for God. More disturbing still, this leader had created a new kind of army, one motivated not by plunder or fear, but by absolute faith in their divine mission. In Medina, Abu Bakr faced a crisis that would have overwhelmed a lesser man. Across Arabia, tribes that had pledged allegiance to Muhammad were declaring independence. Some claimed their oath had died with the Prophet. Others followed new leaders who proclaimed themselves prophets and promised glory and paradise. The most serious challenge came from Musaylima of the Banu Hanifa tribe, who claimed revelations equal to Muhammad's. Musaylima had built substantial following in central Arabia's Yamama region. In the south, a woman named Saja claimed prophetic authority and allied with Musaylima. In the east, Tulayha led Bedouin warriors who had never fully accepted Islamic authority. Abu Bakr's response would define his legacy and Islam's future. Many advisors urged caution, arguing the Muslim community was too small and fragmented to take on multiple enemies. But Abu Bakr understood that any weakness would encourage further rebellions and could lead to complete collapse. "By Allah," he declared, "if they refuse to pay even a single camel they used to pay to the Messenger of Allah, I will fight them for it." This was not merely about taxation, it was about whether Muhammad's unity would survive his death. Abu Bakr launched the Ridda Wars, the wars of apostasy. He divided his forces into multiple armies, each led by trusted commanders, sending them to deal with rebellions simultaneously. The strategy was risky, as each Muslim army would be outnumbered, but it prevented rebels from uniting against a single large force. The most important campaign was led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, the former Meccan cavalry commander who had embraced Islam and proven himself one of history's most brilliant tacticians. Khalid was given the mission of defeating Musaylima in the Yamama. At the Battle of Zafar in 632 CE, facing Tulayha's coalition, Khalid employed tactics that had made him famous. He feigned retreat, drawing enemy cavalry into a trap, then wheeled around and destroyed them with devastating charge. Tulayha barely escaped, and his coalition collapsed overnight. But the greatest challenge lay ahead. Musaylima had fortified himself in Yamama's gardens with 40,000 men, nearly twice any force the Muslims could field. The liar of Yamama had convinced followers he was equal to Muhammad in prophetic authority. The Battle of Yamama in 633 CE was one of early Islamic history's bloodiest conflicts. Musaylima's forces fought with desperate courage, knowing defeat would mean not just military conquest, but complete discrediting of their beliefs. The fighting was so intense, it became known as the Garden of Death. The turning point came when Wahshi ibn Harb, the same man who had killed Muhammad's uncle Hamza at Uhud, hurled his javelin at Musaylima and struck him down. With their prophet dead, Banu Hanifa resistance collapsed, and Khalid's victory was complete. The Ridda Wars lasted less than 2 years, but had profound impact. Abu Bakr had preserved Islamic unity and created a battle-hardened army of unprecedented skill and motivation. The tribal contingents had learned to work together as a unified force, transcending old loyalties and rivalries. More importantly, the wars established a crucial principle. Conversion to Islam was not merely personal spiritual decision, but political commitment that could not be easily abandoned. The Islamic State would not tolerate apostasy or rebellion. With Arabia secure, Abu Bakr turned to a project that would have seemed impossible years earlier, expanding Islamic rule beyond the peninsula. He had received reports that the Byzantine and Sasanian empires were weakened by their long wars, and he saw opportunity to spread Islam while providing his warriors with new challenges and rewards. The first target was Iraq, the wealthy province forming the Sasanian Empire's heartland. Abu Bakr appointed Khalid ibn al-Walid to lead this campaign, giving him instructions that would become the template for all future Islamic conquests. Fight them, but do not be excessive. Do not kill children, women, or old men. Do not cut down fruit trees or destroy crops. Khalid's invasion of Iraq in 633 CE caught the Sasanians completely off guard. Persian commanders had expected traditional Bedouin raids, quick strikes for booty before retreating to desert safety. Instead, they faced a disciplined army seeking permanent conquest. The Battle of Chains at Zat as-Salasil demonstrated Khalid's genius and Islamic military effectiveness. Facing a larger Persian force commanded by Hormuz, one of the Sasanian Empire's most experienced generals, Khalid employed double envelopment that completely surrounded the enemy. Hormuz was killed in single combat by Khalid, and his army was virtually annihilated. The psychological impact was enormous. For centuries, the Sasanian Empire had been one of the world's two great powers. The idea that Arab tribesmen could defeat elite Persian troops in open battle seemed impossible, yet it had happened. As news of Khalid's victories spread, Arab tribes throughout the region joined the Islamic cause. Many were Christian Arabs who had served as buffer states between the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, but grown tired of being caught between superpowers. Islam's message of Arab unity offered them new identity and purpose. Meanwhile, other Muslim armies achieved similar successes. In Syria, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah led methodical conquest of Byzantine provinces, capturing Damascus through military skill and diplomatic negotiation. Many local populations, exhausted by heavy taxation and religious persecution, welcomed Arabs as liberators. Abu Bakr's successor, Umar ibn al-Khattab, inherited an empire expanding at almost uncontrollable rate. Umar was very different from gentle Abu Bakr, tall, austere, possessed of iron will that made him both feared and respected. He had been one of Muhammad's closest companions, with a reputation for absolute integrity. Umar's first major decision was recalling Khalid from Iraq and sending him to Syria, where Muslim forces faced their greatest challenge yet. Byzantine Emperor Heraclius had assembled a massive army of over 100,000 men and was preparing to drive Muslims out of Syria. Khalid's transfer from Iraq to Syria was a logistical masterpiece. Rather than taking the long route around the desert, he led his army directly across the Syrian desert, covering 500 miles in 18 days. The march was so difficult, many men had to drink camel blood to survive, but it allowed Khalid to arrive just as the Byzantine offensive began. The decisive confrontation came at Yarmouk in 636 CE, fought in the Jordan Valley. The Byzantine army was larger and better equipped than any force Muslims had faced. For 6 days, the armies maneuvered without decisive advantage. The turning point came when Khalid executed one of military history's most brilliant maneuvers. While the main Muslim army engaged the Byzantine center, Khalid led cavalry in wide flanking movement behind enemy lines. At the crucial moment, he charged into the Byzantine army's rear, while other Muslim forces attacked from front. Caught between two forces and unable to retreat, the Byzantine army collapsed in complete disorder. The victory at Yarmouk opened the way for Muslim conquest of Jerusalem. The city had been under siege for months when Patriarch Sophronius finally agreed to surrender, but only if the Caliph himself came to receive the city's keys. Umar's journey to Jerusalem in 638 CE became legendary. The man who ruled an empire stretching from Arabia to Persia's borders travelled with only a single servant, taking turns riding their one camel. When they reached Jerusalem's outskirts, it was the servant's turn to ride, and Umar walked beside the camel. The sight of the Caliph entering Jerusalem on foot, dressed in simple robes and showing no imperial pomp, made profound impression on Muslims and Christians alike. Here was a conqueror unlike any the world had seen, one who combined absolute power with personal humility and genuine piety. Umar's treatment of Jerusalem's Christian population set the standard for Islamic rule over religious minorities. The Covenant of Umar guaranteed Christians freedom of worship, protection of churches, and right to govern their communities according to religious laws. In return, they would pay special tax called jizya and acknowledge Muslim political authority. This is the security which Umar grants to the people of Jerusalem, the covenant began. He grants them security for their lives, property, churches, and crosses. Their churches shall not be turned into dwelling places, nor destroyed, nor shall anything be taken from their property. While Umar secured Syria and Palestine's conquest, other Muslim armies completed the Sasanian Empire's destruction. The decisive battle came at Qadisiyah in 636 CE, where Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas led Muslims against the last great Persian force commanded by Rostam Farrokhzad, one of Sasanian history's most celebrated generals. Qadisiyah lasted 4 days and became one of Islamic military history's most famous conflicts. The Persians fought with desperate courage, knowing defeat meant their empire's end, but were overwhelmed by Arab warriors' religious fervour and tactical skill. When Rostam was killed on the final day, Persian resistance collapsed entirely. The fall of Ctesiphon opened the way for Muslim armies to advance into Persia's heart. The wealth they captured was beyond anything Arabs had imagined. Gold and silver, precious stones, silk and spices, art accumulated over centuries. The famous carpet of Chosroes, woven with gold thread and precious stones, was so valuable it had to be cut into pieces and distributed among Muslim warriors. But perhaps more important than material wealth was the psychological impact. Within a single generation, Muslims had destroyed one of the world's great empires and reduced the other to a shadow of its former self. The Byzantine Empire still controlled Constantinople and parts of Anatolia, but had lost its wealthiest provinces. The speed and completeness of these conquests raised profound questions. How had desert tribes, united only by faith in new religion, managed to defeat professional armies of the world's greatest empires? Part of the answer lay in military innovations Muslims had developed. The Islamic army was more mobile than opponents, relying heavily on cavalry and camel-mounted archers who could strike quickly and retreat before enemy response. Muslims had also mastered siege warfare, learning from Persian and Byzantine techniques. But military skill alone could not explain Islamic success's magnitude. Equally important was administrative genius of leaders like Umar, who created government systems that could effectively rule vast conquered territories. Rather than imposing Arab customs, Muslims adopted and adapted Byzantine and Sasanian administrative practices. Umar established new capitals at Kufa in Iraq and Fustat in Egypt, creating administrative centres that could govern conquered territories without relying on distant Medina. He created military pension systems, ensuring Arab warrior loyalty while providing incentives for continued conquests. He established treasury, the Bayt al-Mal, collecting taxes and distributing them according to Islamic social justice principles. Most importantly, Umar created legal and administrative framework accommodating the Islamic Empire's diverse populations. Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians were granted dhimmi status, protected minorities who could practice religions freely in exchange for paying special taxes and acknowledging Muslim political authority. The success of this system can be measured by the fact that many conquered populations actively supported Muslim rule. In Egypt, Coptic Christians had been persecuted by Byzantine authorities for theological differences. When Amr ibn al-As's Muslim army arrived, many Copts welcomed them as liberators. But rapid expansion also created new challenges within the Muslim community. Vast wealth flowing into Medina began creating social divisions that had not existed during Muhammad's lifetime. Some early converts felt they deserved larger shares than recent converts who had joined only after Islam's success became apparent. Umar tried to address these concerns by creating stipend systems based on conversion order and community service. Those who had embraced Islam earliest and fought in the most important battles received largest payments. This Diwan system worked reasonably well during Umar's lifetime, but contained seeds of future conflicts. Umar's death in 644 CE illustrated both achievements and vulnerabilities of the Islamic State. The Caliph was assassinated by Abu Lulu, a Persian slave captured during Iraq's conquest. Abu Lulu's motives were apparently personal, but his action highlighted tensions beneath Islamic society's surface. Rather than appointing his successor, Umar established a council of 6 prominent Muhammad companions to choose the next caliph. After 3 days' deliberation, the council chose Uthman ibn Affan, a wealthy merchant from the Umayyad clan who had been one of Muhammad's earliest supporters. But his selection was controversial because it passed over Ali ibn Abi Talib, whom many believed had stronger claim as Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. Uthman's 12-year reign saw the Islamic Empire reach its greatest territorial extent during the rightly guided caliph's period. Muslim armies conquered the remainder of Persia, advanced into Central Asia, and established Mediterranean naval presence. Cyprus's conquest in 649 CE marked Islamic naval power's beginning. But Uthman's reign was also marked by growing internal tensions. The new caliph was accused of favoritism toward his Umayyad clan, many of whom had been among the last to convert. Key governorships and military commands were given to Uthman's relatives, including his cousin Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, appointed governor of Syria. Most controversial was Uthman's Quran standardization. During conquests, it became apparent that different regions used slightly different versions of the Holy Book. Uthman ordered a single, authoritative version be prepared and all other copies destroyed. While probably necessary for Islamic doctrine unity, it was deeply resented by Muslims who felt their local traditions were being erased. Opposition to Uthman came to a head in 656 CE, when rebels from Egypt, Iraq, and other provinces converged on Medina demanding the caliph's removal. They accused Uthman of corruption, nepotism, and deviation from principles established by Muhammad and his predecessors. When Uthman refused to abdicate, rebels besieged his house for several weeks. Uthman's supporters urged him to call for military assistance from loyal provincial governors, but the elderly caliph refused to shed Muslim blood to preserve his power. "I will not be the first successor of the Messenger of Allah to spill his community's blood," he declared. On June 17, 656 CE, rebels broke into Uthman's house and killed him as he sat reading the Quran. His blood stained the holy book's pages, creating a powerful symbol used by his supporters for generations. The third caliph's murder marked the end of unity, characterizing the early Islamic State and the beginning of Islam's first civil war. Ali ibn Abi Talib, passed over twice for the caliphate, was now chosen by rebels and Medina's people to lead the community. But his selection was immediately challenged by powerful figures who accused him of complicity in Uthman's murder. Aisha, the Prophet's widow, joined with Talha and al-Zubayr in demanding Ali punish Uthman's killers before assuming the caliphate. When Ali refused, arguing the situation was too complex for immediate action, Aisha and her allies raised an army and marched against him. The Battle of the Camel, fought near Basra in 656 CE, was a tragedy, pitting Islam's most revered figures against each other. Aisha commanded from a howdah mounted on a camel, giving the battle its name. Ali's forces ultimately prevailed, but victory came at terrible cost. Talha and al-Zubayr were killed. Aisha was captured, but treated with respect due to the mother of the believers. The Battle of the Camel was only the beginning of Ali's troubles. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, Syria's governor and Uthman's cousin, refused to recognize Ali's authority and demanded the new caliph hand over Uthman's killers. When Ali refused, Muawiyah declared himself rightful caliph and prepared for war. The confrontation came at Siffin in 657 CE. Fought on the Euphrates riverbanks in Syria. For months, armies faced each other, engaging in skirmishes and negotiations. The battle that finally erupted was one of early Islamic history's bloodiest, with tens of thousands of Muslims killing each other in their faith's name. As Ali's forces began gaining advantage, Muawiyah's supporters raised Quran copies on their spears and called for arbitration according to the Holy Book. Ali was reluctant, suspecting a trick, but many of his supporters insisted he could not refuse an appeal to divine guidance. The arbitration that followed was disaster for Ali. The two arbitrators reached a decision satisfying neither side, weakening Ali's position while strengthening Muawiyah's. Even worse, a faction of Ali's supporters, the Kharijites, rejected arbitration entirely. They argued the Quran was clear about right and wrong, and that human arbitration was unnecessary and blasphemous. La hukma illa lillah, no judgment but God's, became their rallying cry. The Kharijites represented Islamic Puritanism that would have lasting impact. They believed any Muslim who committed major sin ceased to be a true believer and could be killed with impunity. They rejected the idea that leadership should be based on tribal affiliation or family connections, arguing that any pious Muslim, regardless of background, could become caliph. Ali was forced to fight a two-front war against both Muawiyah's supporters and Kharijite extremists. He defeated the Kharijites at Nahrawan in 658 CE, but victory only increased their hatred. They viewed Ali as a traitor to Islam's true principles and began plotting his assassination. On January 26, 661 CE, as Ali entered the mosque in Kufa for morning prayers, he was struck down by Kharijite assassin Abd al-Rahman ibn Muljam. The poisoned sword inflicted a mortal wound, and Ali died 2 days later, becoming the last of the rightly guided caliphs. Ali's death marked the end of an era in Islamic history. The period of the rightly guided caliphs had seen the Islamic Empire expand from the Arabian Peninsula to encompass most of the Middle East and parts of North Africa. It had witnessed the creation of administrative and legal systems that would govern Islamic society for centuries. But it had also seen the emergence of sectarian divisions that would permanently fracture the Muslim community. With Ali's death, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan became undisputed caliph, establishing the Umayyad dynasty that would rule the Islamic Empire for the next 90 years. The capital shifted from Medina to Damascus, marking Islam's transformation from an Arabian religion into a truly international civilization. The lightning conquest was complete. In less than 3 decades, Islam's armies had shattered 2 great empires and created a new world order. The desert warriors who had once fought over water rights now ruled from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. But with great power came great challenges, and the unity that had made these conquests possible was already fracturing. The age of the rightly guided caliphs was ending, and the age of empire was about to begin. In 661 CE, as Ali's body was laid to rest in Najaf, a new chapter in Islamic history began in Damascus. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan was proclaimed caliph in the Umayyad mosque in a ceremony unlike anything the Islamic world had seen. Gone was the simple election by community consensus. In its place was formal coronation. Borrowing heavily from Byzantine imperial traditions, Muawiyah was perfectly suited to this new age of Islamic empire. Son of Abu Sufyan, who had led Meccan resistance to Muhammad before converting, Muawiyah possessed the political cunning and administrative skill the rapidly expanding state desperately needed. Unlike previous caliphs chosen for religious devotion, Muawiyah was a pragmatist who understood that governing vast empire required different skills than leading a community of believers. The transfer of the Islamic capital from Medina to Damascus represented fundamental transformation in Islamic rule's nature. Medina had been Islam's spiritual heart, where the caliph was first among equals in a faith-bound community. Damascus was a cosmopolitan centre where Arab, Greek, Persian, and Aramaic influences had mingled for centuries. Under Muawiyah, the Islamic Empire began taking on traditional imperial state characteristics. The caliph surrounded himself with monarchy's pomp and ceremony, holding court in palaces rivaling Constantinople and Ctesiphon. He established professional bureaucracy, staffed by experienced administrators, many of whom were Christians and Jews who had served the previous Byzantine administration. This pragmatic governance approach was both strength and controversy source. Muawiyah's willingness to employ non-Muslims in authority positions allowed efficient empire function, but drew criticism from those believing only Muslims should hold power in an Islamic state. One of Muawiyah's most significant innovations was establishing Arabic as the official government language throughout the empire. Previously, conquered territories had continued using traditional administrative languages, Greek in former Byzantine provinces, Persian in former Sasanian territories. Arabic imposition created unified communication system, binding the empire together and facilitating Islamic culture spread. Empire Arabization was accompanied by massive urban development. New cities were founded throughout conquered territories, designed according to Islamic principles and serving as Arab settlement and Islamic culture centres. Kairouan in Tunisia, founded in 670 CE, became the base for further North African expansion. Wasit in Iraq, established in 702 CE, served as garrison town for Arab troops. But perhaps the most visible symbol of Umayyad power was Jerusalem's Dome of the Rock construction, completed in 691 CE. This magnificent structure, with its golden dome and intricate mosaics, was built where Jewish tradition held Abraham had prepared to sacrifice Isaac, and Muslims believed Muhammad had ascended to heaven. The Dome of the Rock was not merely a religious monument, but political statement, asserting Islamic supremacy over the holy city. Under the Umayyads, the Islamic Empire reached its greatest territorial extent. In the west, Muslim armies crossed Gibraltar in 711 CE and conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula within 7 years. The Visigothic kingdom collapsed with stunning rapidity as cities opened their gates to Muslim conquerors. The conquest leader was Tariq ibn Ziyad, a Berber general who had converted to Islam. When Tariq landed at the rock that would bear his name, Jabal Tariq, or Gibraltar, he reportedly burned his ships to demonstrate there could be no retreat. "Behind you is the sea," he told his troops. "Before you, the enemy. You have nowhere to go except through your enemies." The Battle of Guadalete in 711 CE saw complete Visigothic army destruction and King Rodric's death. Within months, Muslim forces had captured Toledo and were advancing toward the Pyrenees. Spain's conquest brought enormous wealth into the Islamic treasury and established Muslim European presence, lasting nearly 8 centuries. Success in Spain encouraged further expansion into France. In 732 CE, a Muslim army led by Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi crossed the Pyrenees and advanced deep into Frankish territory, capturing Bordeaux and threatening Tours. The Muslim advance was finally halted by Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours, but not before the Islamic Empire had demonstrated its ability to project power across vast distances. In the east, Muslim armies were equally successful. Transoxiana's conquest, the region beyond the Oxus River in Central Asia, brought Islam into contact with Turkish tribes and Chinese civilization. The Battle of Talas in 751 CE, fought between Muslim forces and a Chinese army, marked Islamic expansion's furthest extent eastward. Sindh's conquest in 711 CE, led by Muhammad ibn Qasim, brought Islam to the Indian subcontinent for the first time. The young general, only 17, demonstrated remarkable diplomatic skill dealing with Indian society's complex religious and social structures. He granted Hindu temple protection and allowed local rulers to maintain positions in exchange for acknowledging Islamic sovereignty. These conquests were not merely military achievements, but represented new civilization spread that synthesized Arab, Persian, Byzantine, and local traditions. In Spain, Muslim rule brought new agricultural techniques, architectural styles, and intellectual traditions. New crops like rice, sugarcane, and citrus fruits revolutionized Spanish agriculture, while irrigation systems turned arid regions into fertile farmland. The Umayyad period saw distinctive Islamic architectural style development, combining elements from various traditions. Damascus's Great Mosque, built by Al-Walid I between 706 and 715 CE, incorporated Byzantine mosaics, Persian decorative techniques, and Arab spatial concepts to create something entirely new. But rapid empire expansion also created new challenges and tensions. Arab warriors who had conquered these territories expected reward with land and wealth, but Umayyad administration was reluctant to allow permanent settlement in conquered provinces. Instead, Arabs were concentrated in garrison towns where they could be maintained as professional military force ready for further conquests. This policy created growing divide between Arab military elite and local populations they ruled. In many regions, conversion to Islam was actually discouraged because it would reduce tax revenue non-Muslims were required to pay. The Mawali, non-Arab converts to Islam, found themselves treated as second-class citizens, despite accepting the faith. The most serious challenge to Umayyad rule came from Ali ibn Abi Talib's descendants, who had never accepted Muawiyah's claim legitimacy. In 680 CE, Hussein ibn Ali, the Prophet's grandson, was invited by Kufa's people to lead rebellion against Umayyad Caliph Yazid I. Hussein set out from Medina with a small band, expecting massive support in Iraq. Instead, Hussein found himself abandoned by supposed supporters and surrounded by a large Umayyad army at Karbala, a small town in the Iraqi desert. On the 10th day of Muharram, 680 CE, Hussein and his 72 companions were killed in battle that would become one of Islamic history's most significant events. Hussein's death at Karbala created permanent schism in the Islamic community. For the Shia, Ali's party, Hussein's martyrdom became their faith's defining moment, a symbol of righteous suffering facing tyrannical oppression. Annual Ashura commemoration, Hussein's death day, became central Shia Islam ritual, marked by mourning ceremonies and passion plays reenacting Karbala's tragedy. The Umayyads tried suppressing Karbala's memory, but Hussein's martyrdom story spread throughout the Islamic world, inspiring countless rebellions and resistance movements. The image of righteous imam dying for principles while corrupt caliph lived in luxury became a powerful tool for opposition movements throughout Islamic history. Despite internal tensions, the Umayyad period was marked by remarkable cultural and intellectual achievements. Greek philosophical and scientific works translation into Arabic began during this period, laying foundation for great intellectual flowering characterizing the Abbasid era. Arabic poetry development reached new heights under poets like Al-Farazdak and Jariyah. The Umayyads also established first Islamic coinage, replacing Byzantine and Sasanian coins previously circulating in conquered territories. New dinars and dirhams bore Arabic inscriptions proclaiming God's unity and Muhammad's prophethood, serving as vehicles for spreading Islamic beliefs throughout the empire's commercial networks. Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz's reign, often called the fifth rightly guided caliph, represented brief return to early Islam's pious ideals. Umar II reversed many policies favouring Arabs over non-Arabs, encouraged conversion to Islam, and reduced tax burden on Mawali. His reforms were popular with general population, but created resentment among Arab elites seeing their privileges eroded. Umar II's early death after only 2.5 years ended this reform experiment, and subsequent Umayyad caliphs returned to policies favouring Arab military aristocracy. But Umar II's brief reign had demonstrated alternative Islamic governance approaches were possible, and raised expectations among non-Arab Muslim population. The final decades of Umayyad rule were marked by increasing instability and rebellion. The empire had grown too large to be effectively governed from Damascus, and regional governors began acting with increasing independence. Arab tribes, divided by ancient rivalries between northern and southern confederations, engaged in civil wars, weakening central government. The most serious threat came from Khorasan, the eastern province encompassing parts of modern Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. Here, revolutionary movement began coalescing around the claim that the caliphate should be restored to the Prophet's family. The movement was deliberately vague about which branch should rule, allowing it to attract support from both Shia supporters of Ali's descendants and those favouring other Hashemite clan members. The Abbasid revolution was led by Abu Muslim, brilliant organiser who built a coalition of Arab settlers, Persian Mawali, and local populations united in opposition to Umayyad rule. The revolutionaries adopted black banners as their symbol, contrasting with Umayyad white banners, and proclaimed their intention to restore justice and equality to the Islamic community. The decisive battle came at the Zab River in Iraq in 750 CE, where last Umayyad Caliph Marwan II was decisively defeated by Abbasid forces. Marwan fled to Egypt, where he was killed, ending nearly 90 years of Umayyad rule. The victorious Abbasids systematically hunted down and killed Umayyad family members, determined to eliminate any restoration possibility. Only one Umayyad dynasty member escaped the massacre. Abd al-Rahman ibn Muawiyah, a young prince in Palestine when revolution began, managed to flee across North Africa and eventually reach Spain. There, in 756 CE, he established independent Umayyad Emirate in Cordoba that would survive for nearly 3 centuries. The Umayyads' fall marked the Arab Empire's end, a new Islamic history phase beginning. The Abbasids would move the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, shifting Islamic civilization's centre eastward and opening the empire to Persian and Central Asian influences. The Arab Empire had reached its zenith under the Umayyads, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to China's borders. But empires built on conquest must continue expanding or face internal decay, and the Umayyads had reached their expansion limits. The black banners of revolution were rising in the east, and a new dynasty was preparing to take history's stage. The age of Damascus was ending, and the age of Baghdad was about to begin. In the year 750 CE, as the last Umayyad Caliph fell at the Battle of the Zab, a new vision was taking shape in the minds of the Abbasid revolutionaries. They would not merely replace one dynasty with another. They would create an entirely new kind of Islamic civilization. The capital would move from Damascus to a city that did not yet exist, a metropolis that would become the greatest centre of learning and culture the world had ever seen. The man who would build this dream was Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the second Abbasid Caliph, who came to power in 754 CE. Al-Mansur was a visionary who understood that lasting power required more than military conquest. It demanded the creation of institutions that could harness the intellectual and cultural energies of the vast Islamic empire. In 762 CE, Al-Mansur chose a site on the banks of the Tigris River in Mesopotamia, the ancient land between 2 rivers that had been the cradle of human civilization. Here, where the Tigris and Euphrates came closest together, he would build his capital. The location was perfect. It controlled the trade routes between east and west, had access to abundant water, and lay at the heart of the Fertile Crescent that had nourished empires for millennia. The city Al-Mansur built was unlike anything the world had seen. Madinat as-Salam, the city of peace, was designed as a perfect circle, with the Caliph's palace and the great mosque at its centre. Massive walls protected the inner city, while 4 gates opened to the cardinal directions, symbolising the Abbasid claim to rule the entire world. But the city would become known by a simpler name, Baghdad, after a Persian village that had once stood on the site. The construction of Baghdad required the labour of 100,000 workers, architects, engineers, craftsmen and labourers drawn from across the Islamic Empire. The circular design was not merely aesthetic, but deeply symbolic. In Islamic cosmology, the circle represented perfection and unity, while the caliph's position at the centre reflected his role as God's representative on earth. But al-Mansur's greatest achievement was not architectural but intellectual. He understood that the Abbasid revolution had succeeded not merely because of military prowess, but because it had promised a return to Islamic ideals of justice and equality. To fulfill this promise, the new dynasty would need to create a civilization that surpassed anything that had come before. The transformation began with a conscious decision to embrace the cultural heritage of all the peoples within the Islamic Empire. Unlike the Umayyads, who had maintained Arab supremacy, the Abbasids proclaimed that all Muslims were equal regardless of their ethnic background. Persian administrators, Turkish soldiers, and Arab scholars worked side by side in the new government. This cultural synthesis found its greatest expression in the translation movement, one of the most remarkable intellectual enterprises in human history. Beginning in the late 8th century and continuing for over 2 centuries, Muslim scholars systematically translated the entire corpus of Greek philosophy, science and medicine into Arabic. But they did not stop there. They also translated works from Persian, Sanskrit, and other languages, creating a vast library of human knowledge. The driving force behind this movement was the recognition that truth was universal and that wisdom could be found in all cultures. As the Caliph al-Ma'mun would later declare, "The truth is more worthy of being followed than the men who speak it." This openness to foreign ideas was revolutionary in an age when most civilizations viewed outsiders with suspicion and hostility. The centre of this intellectual revolution was the Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, established in Baghdad during the reign of Harun al-Rashid and expanded by his son al-Ma'mun. This was not merely a library, but a research institute, translation centre, and academy, all rolled into one. Here, scholars from across the known world gathered to study, debate, and push the boundaries of human knowledge. The House of Wisdom employed translators who were masters of multiple languages and cultures. Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Christian Arab, led a team that translated virtually the entire corpus of Greek medical and philosophical texts. The Banu Musa brothers, 3 Persian scholars, not only translated Greek mathematical works, but also invented ingenious mechanical devices that prefigured modern robotics. But the Muslim scholars did not merely preserve ancient knowledge, they built upon it, making discoveries that would transform human understanding of the natural world. Al-Khwarizmi, working in the House of Wisdom during the early 9th century, developed the mathematical discipline that would become known as algebra. His name would give us the word algorithm, while his systematic approach to solving equations laid the foundation for modern mathematics. In the field of medicine, Al-Razi, known in the West as Razis, made discoveries that would not be surpassed for centuries. Working in Baghdad's hospitals, he was the first to distinguish between smallpox and measles, developed new surgical techniques, and wrote medical texts that were used in European universities until the Renaissance. His approach to medicine was revolutionary. He insisted on careful observation, systematic record keeping, and the testing of treatments before their adoption. The Islamic approach to learning was fundamentally different from what had come before. Rather than simply accepting the authority of ancient texts, Muslim scholars insisted on verification through observation and experimentation. Al-Biruni, the great polymath of the 11th century, exemplified this approach when he calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy by measuring the height of mountains and using trigonometry. This scientific revolution was supported by a network of institutions that had no parallel in the medieval world. Every major city in the Islamic Empire had its library, observatory, and hospital. The Abbasid caliphs competed with each other to attract the greatest scholars, offering generous salaries and unlimited resources for research. The reign of Harun al-Rashid, 786 to 809 CE, marked the peak of Abbasid power and cultural achievement. This was the caliph, immortalized in the Arabian Nights, ruling over an empire that stretched from Spain to Central Asia and commanded resources that dwarfed those of any contemporary ruler. Harun's court in Baghdad was a magnet for poets, scholars, musicians, and artists from across the known world. But Harun was more than just a patron of the arts. He was a skilled administrator who created the governmental systems that allowed the Islamic Empire to function effectively across vast distances. He established a postal system that could carry messages from Baghdad to Cordoba in a matter of weeks. He created a professional civil service that recruited talent based on merit rather than birth. Most importantly, he maintained the delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy that kept the empire together. The cultural flowering of the Abbasid period was not limited to the sciences. Arabic poetry reached new heights of sophistication and beauty. Abu Nuwas revolutionized Arabic verse with his wine songs and love poetry, while al-Mutanabi created epic poems that are still memorized and recited throughout the Arab world. The art of calligraphy was elevated to unprecedented levels, with master calligraphers creating works of stunning beauty that adorned mosques and palaces throughout the empire. Architecture too reached new heights during this period. The Great Mosque of Samarra, built during the reign of al-Mutawakkil, was the largest mosque in the world, its spiral minaret visible for miles across the Mesopotamian plain. The palaces of Baghdad and Samarra showcased a new Islamic architectural style that combined elements from Persian, Byzantine, and Arab traditions. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Abbasid civilization was its cosmopolitan character. In the streets of Baghdad, one could hear dozens of languages and encounter people from every corner of the known world. Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians worked alongside Muslims in the government and the House of Wisdom. This diversity was not merely tolerated, but celebrated as a source of strength and creativity. The Abbasid approach to governance reflected this cosmopolitan outlook. Rather than imposing a single model of Islamic law, they allowed different communities to govern themselves according to their own traditions, as long as they acknowledged the caliph's political authority. This flexibility allowed the empire to accommodate an extraordinary diversity of peoples and cultures. However, this very success contained the seeds of future problems. As the empire grew larger and more complex, it became increasingly difficult to govern from a single centre. Regional governors began to assert greater independence, and local dynasties started to emerge that paid only nominal allegiance to Baghdad. The first signs of political fragmentation appeared during the reign of al-Ma'mun, 813 to 833 CE. Ironically, one of the greatest patrons of learning in Islamic history. Al-Ma'mun's support for the Mu'tazila school of theology, which emphasized reason and free will, created a religious controversy that divided the Islamic community. His attempt to impose Mu'tazila doctrine through the Mihna, or Inquisition, backfired and weakened the caliph's religious authority. More seriously, al-Ma'mun's reliance on Turkish slave soldiers, known as Mamluks, to maintain his power created a new source of instability. These Turkish guards, recruited from the steppes of Central Asia, were superb warriors, but had no loyalty to the Abbasid dynasty or Islamic civilization. They served whoever paid them best and were willing to make and unmake caliphs as it suited their interests. The crisis came to a head during the reign of al-Mutawakkil, 847 to 861 CE, who was assassinated by his own Turkish guards. This event marked the beginning of what historians call the Anarchy at Samarra, a period during which the Turkish Mamluks effectively controlled the caliphate, installing and deposing caliphs at will. The political chaos at the centre of the empire encouraged regional governors to assert their independence. In 868 CE, Ahmad ibn Tulun established an autonomous dynasty in Egypt that paid only nominal allegiance to Baghdad. The Saffarids took control of eastern Persia, while the Samanids established their rule in Transoxiana. By the end of the 9th century, the Abbasid Caliph controlled little more than Baghdad and its immediate surroundings. But remarkably, even as political power fragmented, Islamic civilization continued to flourish. The regional dynasties that emerged from the Abbasid Empire's breakup were often great patrons of learning and culture. The Fatimids in Egypt established Al-Azhar University, which became one of the Islamic world's greatest centres of learning. The Samanids in Central Asia patronised Persian literature and helped create the cultural renaissance that would produce poets like Ferdowsi and Rumi. This decentralisation of power actually accelerated the spread of Islamic culture and learning. No longer concentrated in Baghdad, centres of scholarship emerged in Cordoba, Cairo, Isfahan, and Samarkand. Each of these cities developed its own intellectual traditions while remaining connected to the broader Islamic cultural network. The final blow to Abbasid political power came in 945 CE, when the Buyids, a Persian dynasty from the Caspian region, captured Baghdad and reduced the caliph to a purely ceremonial figure. The Buyid leader Ahmad ibn Buya took the title of Amir al-Umara, Commander of Commanders, while allowing the Abbasid caliph to retain his religious functions. This arrangement, which would persist for over a century, marked the end of the Abbasid Golden Age, but not the end of Islamic civilization's greatness. The political fragmentation of the Islamic world would lead to new forms of cultural expression and intellectual achievement, as different regions developed their own distinctive traditions while remaining part of the broader Islamic cultural sphere. The House of Wisdom had fulfilled its promise, creating a civilization that preserved and expanded human knowledge in ways that would benefit all mankind. Though political power had fragmented, the intellectual and cultural achievements of the Abbasid Golden Age would continue to influence the world for centuries to come. The light of learning that had been kindled in Baghdad would spread to every corner of the Islamic world and beyond, illuminating the path toward the Renaissance and the modern age. The Golden Age of unity was ending, but the Golden Age of Islamic civilization was just beginning to reach its full flowering. In 945 CE, as the Buyid warriors entered Baghdad and reduced the Abbasid caliph to a ceremonial figurehead, the Islamic world entered a new phase of its history. Political unity was shattered, but from this fragmentation would emerge a remarkable flowering of regional civilizations, each contributing its own genius to the broader tapestry of Islamic culture. In Spain, the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba reached its zenith under Abd al-Rahman III, who declared himself caliph in 929 CE, directly challenging Abbasid claims to universal leadership. Cordoba became a rival to Baghdad, its library containing over 400,000 volumes, more books than existed in all of Christian Europe combined. The city's scholars translated Aristotle and Plato, advanced mathematics and astronomy, and created architectural marvels like the Great Mosque of Cordoba with its forest of horseshoe arches. In Egypt, the Fatimids established their own caliphate in 969 CE, claiming descent from the Prophet's daughter Fatima. These Ismaili Shia rulers built Cairo as their capital and founded Al-Azhar University, which would become one of the Islamic world's most important centres of learning. The Fatimids controlled the lucrative trade routes between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, using their wealth to patronise art, architecture, and scholarship. To the east, the Ghaznavids carved out an empire stretching from Afghanistan to northern India. Mahmud of Ghazni launched 17 raids into India, bringing back enormous wealth that he used to transform his capital into a centre of Persian culture. His court attracted poets like Ferdowsi, whose epic Shahnameh became the national poem of Persia, preserving pre-Islamic Iranian traditions within an Islamic framework. But the most significant new power to emerge was the Seljuk Turks, nomadic warriors from Central Asia who had converted to Sunni Islam and swept into the Middle East in the 11th century. Under leaders like Tugril Beg and Alp Arslan, the Seljuks conquered most of Persia and Iraq, capturing Baghdad in 1055 CE and reducing the Buyids to insignificance. The Seljuks brought new energy to the Islamic world. Unlike the Buyids, who had been content to rule through existing Persian administrative structures, the Seljuks actively promoted Sunni Islam and sought to revive the caliphate's prestige. They established madrasas, religious schools, throughout their territories, and patronized scholars who worked to systematize Islamic law and theology. The greatest of these scholars was Al-Ghazali, whose works reconciled Islamic mysticism with orthodox theology and philosophy with religious faith. Writing in the late 11th century, Al-Ghazali created a synthesis that would dominate Islamic thought for centuries. His revival of the religious sciences became one of the most influential works in Islamic literature, showing how spiritual experience and rational inquiry could complement rather than contradict each other. But the Seljuk expansion brought them into direct conflict with the Byzantine Empire, which had been slowly recovering from its earlier losses to the Arabs. The decisive confrontation came at Manzikert in 1071 CE, where Sultan Alp Arslan defeated the Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV and opened Anatolia to Turkish settlement. This victory would have consequences far beyond the immediate military situation. It would eventually lead to the establishment of the Ottoman Empire and change the balance of power between Christianity and Islam. The Byzantine defeat at Manzikert sent shockwaves through the Christian world. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos sent desperate appeals to the West for help against the Turkish advance. His pleas reached Pope Urban II, who saw an opportunity to unite the fractious Christian kingdoms of Europe under papal leadership, while also aiding the Eastern Christians. On November 27, 1095 CE, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II delivered one of history's most consequential speeches. He called upon the Knights of Europe to take up arms and march to the Holy Land to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. "God wills it!" the crowd shouted in response, and the Crusades began. The First Crusade caught the Islamic world completely unprepared. The Muslim rulers were too busy fighting each other to present a united front against the Christian invaders. The Fatimids in Egypt were at war with the Seljuks in Syria. The Seljuk Empire itself was fragmenting into competing principalities. Local rulers in Syria and Palestine were more concerned with their immediate neighbours than with distant European knights. But it was Zengi's son, Nur ad-Din, who truly began the process of Muslim reunification. Nur ad-Din understood that defeating the Crusaders required more than military action. It demanded a revival of Islamic unity and purpose. He promoted the concept of jihad not merely as warfare, but as spiritual struggle, and he worked tirelessly to heal the divisions between Sunni and Shia Muslims. The culmination of this Islamic revival came with Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, Saladin, a Kurdish general who had served under Nur ad-Din and eventually established his own dynasty in Egypt and Syria. Saladin combined military genius with political skill and genuine piety, making him the ideal leader for the Islamic counter-crusade. Saladin's greatest triumph came at the Battle of Hattin on July 4th, 1187 CE. Luring the Crusader army into the waterless hills above the Sea of Galilee, Saladin surrounded and destroyed the largest Christian force ever assembled in the Holy Land. King Guy of Jerusalem was captured, along with most of the military order's leadership. The True Cross, Christianity's most sacred relic, fell into Muslim hands. With the Crusader army destroyed, Saladin moved swiftly to recapture the territories they had held for nearly a century. City after city surrendered, often without a fight. On October 2nd, 1187 CE, Saladin entered Jerusalem in triumph. But unlike the Crusaders' massacre 88 years earlier, Saladin's conquest was marked by mercy and restraint. Christians were allowed to leave safely, and the city's holy sites were protected. The recapture of Jerusalem sent shockwaves through Europe and prompted the Third Crusade, led by three of medieval Europe's most famous rulers: Frederick Barbarossa of Germany, Philip Augustus of France, and Richard the Lionheart of England. This crusade became a personal duel between Richard and Saladin, two men who came to respect each other even as they fought. The Third Crusade achieved limited success. Richard recaptured some coastal cities and secured Christian access to Jerusalem, but he could not retake the Holy City itself. The Treaty of Ramla in 1192 CE established a compromise that allowed Christian pilgrims to visit Jerusalem while acknowledging Muslim sovereignty over the city. Saladin's success was not merely military, but cultural and spiritual. He became a hero not only to Muslims, but even to many Christians, who admired his chivalry and honour. Medieval European literature. The later Crusades achieved even less than the Third. The Fourth Crusade was diverted to Constantinople, where the Crusaders sacked the Byzantine capital in 1204 CE, fatally weakening the Eastern Roman Empire. The Children's Crusade of 1212 CE ended in tragedy, with thousands of young people dying or being sold into slavery. The Fifth through Eighth Crusades all failed to achieve their objectives, and by 1291 CE, the last Crusader stronghold at Acre had fallen to the Mamluks. But the Crusades' impact on Islamic civilization was profound and lasting. The external threat had forced Muslims to rediscover their unity and purpose. The concept of jihad was revitalized, not merely as conquest but as defense of the faith. The experience of fighting European invaders also led to increased cultural exchange, as Muslims encountered new technologies, ideas and practices from the West. During this same period, Islamic civilization continued to advance in other areas. In Spain, the philosopher Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, created a synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy and Islamic theology that would profoundly influence both Muslim and Christian thought. His commentaries on Aristotle were translated into Latin and became standard texts in European universities. In the Eastern Islamic world, scholars like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and Al-Biruni made groundbreaking contributions to medicine, mathematics, and natural philosophy. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine remained the standard medical textbook in both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. Al-Biruni studies of Indian mathematics and astronomy helped transmit crucial knowledge from the subcontinent to the broader Islamic world. The period also saw the flourishing of Sufi mysticism, which offered a more personal and emotional approach to Islamic spirituality. Sufi orders spread throughout the Islamic world, creating networks of spiritual brotherhood that transcended political boundaries. The poetry of Sufi masters like Rumi and Hafez expressed the deepest longings of the human soul in language of extraordinary beauty and power. But even as Islamic civilization reached new heights of cultural achievement, political fragmentation continued to weaken the Muslim world's ability to respond to external threats. The Ayyubid dynasty that Saladin had founded fragmented after his death. The Seljuk Empire broke apart into competing principalities. In Spain, the Umayyad Caliphate collapsed in 1031 CE, giving way to dozens of small Taifa kingdoms that were easy prey for the advancing Christian reconquest. The most serious threat, however, was gathering in the east, where a new power was rising that would test Islamic civilization as it had never been tested before. In the steppes of Mongolia, a tribal leader named Temujin was uniting the nomadic peoples under his leadership. Soon he would take the name Genghis Khan, and his armies would sweep across Asia like a hurricane, destroying everything in their path. The reports reaching the Islamic world spoke of unprecedented destruction. Entire cities wiped from the face of the earth, populations massacred, irrigation systems destroyed, libraries burned. The Mongol war machine was unlike anything the world had ever seen, combining superior military organization with psychological warfare and utter ruthlessness toward those who resisted. As the 13th century dawned, the Islamic world stood at a crossroads. The Crusades had been largely defeated, and Islamic civilization had reached new heights of cultural and intellectual achievement. But the political fragmentation that had allowed this cultural flowering had also left the Muslim world vulnerable to external attack. The storm clouds were gathering in the east, and the greatest test in Islamic history was about to begin. The age of the Crusades had ended with Islamic victory, but it had also revealed the Muslim world's fundamental weakness, its inability to unite in the face of external threats. The regional dynasties that had created such brilliant civilizations in Cordoba, Cairo, and Baghdad in the year 1206 CE, in a remote valley of the Mongolian steppes, a tribal assembly known as a Kurultai proclaimed Temujin as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. Few in the Islamic world had ever heard of this distant nomad, and fewer still could have imagined that his rise would bring about the greatest catastrophe in their civilization's history. The Mongol Empire that Genghis Khan forged was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was not built on religious ideology or cultural superiority, but on pure military efficiency and the ruthless application of terror. The Mongol war machine combined superior mobility, innovative tactics, and psychological warfare, with a complete disregard for the lives of those who resisted. The first Islamic territory to feel the Mongol fury was the Khwarezmian Empire, which controlled much of Central Asia and Persia. The conflict began almost by accident in 1218 CE, when the governor of Otrar, a border town, executed Mongol merchants and confiscated their goods. When Genghis Khan sent ambassadors demanding justice, the Khwarezm Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad had them killed, a decision that would doom his empire and much of the Islamic world. Genghis Khan's response was swift and terrible. In 1219 CE, he led an army of 200,000 men across the steppes toward the prosperous cities of Central Asia. The Mongol strategy was simple but devastatingly effective. Cities that surrendered immediately would be spared, while those that resisted would be utterly destroyed as an example to others. The siege of Bukhara in 1220 CE set the pattern for what was to come. When the city's defenders fled, Genghis Khan entered the Great Mosque and declared to the assembled population, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The city was systematically looted, its libraries burned, and its population enslaved or massacred. Samarkand, one of the jewels of Islamic civilization, fell after a brief siege. The Mongols drove the city's population onto the plain outside the walls and methodically slaughtered them, men, women, and children alike. Contemporary chroniclers reported that 50,000 people were killed in a single day, their bodies left to rot under the Central Asian sun. But the worst was yet to come. The city of Merv, known as the Pearl of the World, was home to over 1 million people and boasted one of the Islamic world's greatest libraries. When it fell to the Mongols in 1221 CE, the destruction was so complete that the city never recovered. The Mongol general Tolui ordered that every living thing in the city be killed, not just humans, but dogs, cats, and even insects. The irrigation systems that had sustained the region for centuries were deliberately destroyed, turning fertile farmland into desert. The psychological impact of these massacres was exactly what the Mongols intended. As word spread of the unprecedented destruction, city after city surrendered without a fight, rather than face annihilation. The Mongol reputation for ruthlessness became their most powerful weapon, often allowing them to conquer territories without having to fight for them. The Khwarezm Shah Muhammad fled before the Mongol advance, dying of exhaustion and despair on an island in the Caspian Sea. His son Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu attempted to continue the resistance, but even his victories were temporary. The Mongols pursued him relentlessly, finally driving him into exile in India, where he would spend his remaining years as a fugitive. With Central Asia and Persia devastated, the Mongols turned their attention to other targets. Genghis Khan died in 1227 CE, but his successors continued his work of conquest. Under Ogedei Khan, Mongol armies swept into Russia and Eastern Europe, destroying Kiev and threatening Vienna. Under Mungke Khan, they prepared for the final assault on the two remaining centres of Islamic power, Baghdad and Cairo. The man chosen to destroy the Abbasid Caliphate was Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, who combined his grandfather's military genius with a particular hatred for Islam. Hulagu had been influenced by his Christian wife and Buddhist advisors, both of whom saw the destruction of the caliphate as a religious duty. In 1257 CE, Hulagu's army of 150,000 men began its march toward Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim, the 37th successor to Abu Bakr, seemed incapable of grasping the magnitude of the threat facing him. Despite desperate pleas from his advisors, he refused to mobilize the empire's resources for defense, apparently believing that his religious authority would protect him from the pagan invaders. The siege of Baghdad began on January 29, 1258 CE. The city that had been the center of Islamic civilization for 5 centuries, home to the House of Wisdom and countless architectural marvels, was surrounded by an army that had already destroyed dozens of cities across Asia. The Mongol siege engines, operated by Chinese engineers, pounded the city's walls day and night. On February 10, 1258 CE, Baghdad's walls were breached and the Mongols poured into the city. What followed was one of history's greatest cultural catastrophes. The House of Wisdom, with its irreplaceable collection of manuscripts, was destroyed. Scholars reported that so many books were thrown into the Tigris River that its waters ran black with ink for days. The Grand Library of Baghdad, which had taken centuries to assemble, was reduced to ashes in a matter of hours. The human cost was equally staggering. Contemporary accounts speak of 200,000 to 1 million people killed in the sack of Baghdad. The Caliph al-Mustasim was captured and, according to Mongol custom, executed without shedding his blood, reportedly by being rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses. With his death, the Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled the Islamic world for over 500 years, came to an end. The destruction of Baghdad sent shockwaves throughout the Islamic world. For Muslims, it was not merely the fall of a city, but the collapse of their entire worldview. The Caliphate had been the symbol of Islamic unity and divine favour. Its destruction seemed to suggest that God had abandoned the Muslim community, leaving them defenceless against their enemies. But even as the Islamic world reeled from this catastrophe, help was coming from an unexpected source. In Egypt, the Mamluk Sultanate had been watching the Mongol advance with growing alarm. The Mamluks were former slave soldiers, mostly Turkic and Circassian warriors, who had seized power from the Ayyubids and established their own dynasty. The Mamluk Sultan Qutuz understood that Egypt would be the Mongols' next target, and that the survival of Islamic civilization depended on stopping their advance. When Hulagu sent ambassadors to Cairo demanding submission, Qutuz had them executed and displayed their heads on the gates of the city, a clear declaration of war. The decisive confrontation came at Ain Jalut in Palestine on September 3, 1260 CE. The Mamluk army, led by the brilliant General Baibars, faced a Mongol force that had never known defeat. The battle was fierce and closely fought, but the Mamluks' superior knowledge of the terrain and their desperate determination to defend their homeland finally prevailed. The Mongol general Kit Bukka was killed and his army was routed. For the first time since their rise to power, the Mongols had suffered a decisive defeat. The victory at Ain Jalut saved not only Egypt, but the entire Islamic world from Mongol conquest. It marked the beginning of the Mongol Empire's decline and the survival of Islamic civilization. But the damage had already been done. The destruction of Baghdad and the other great cities of the Islamic world had dealt a blow from which the civilization would take centuries to recover. The irrigation systems of Mesopotamia, built up over millennia, lay in ruins. The population of the region had been decimated. The great libraries and centres of learning had been destroyed, taking with them irreplaceable works of science, philosophy, and literature. Yet even in this darkest hour, Islamic civilization showed its remarkable resilience. In the aftermath of the Mongol invasions, new centers of Islamic culture began to emerge. In Cairo, the Mamluks patronized scholars and artists, creating a new flowering of Islamic art and architecture. The great mosque madrasas of Cairo, with their soaring minarets and intricate geometric decorations, rivaled anything that had been built in Baghdad. In Spain, the Nasrid dynasty established the Kingdom of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Iberia. The Alhambra, their palace complex, became one of the masterpieces of Islamic architecture, its delicate arches and intricate tilework creating spaces of extraordinary beauty and serenity. Perhaps most remarkably, many of the Mongol conquerors themselves eventually converted to Islam. Ghazan Khan, who ruled the Mongol Ilkhanate in Persia, embraced Islam in 1295 CE and began the process of rebuilding the cities his predecessors had destroyed. The Mongol elite intermarried with local Muslim families, and within a few generations, the descendants of the destroyers had become the protectors of Islamic civilization. This process of conversion and assimilation was facilitated by the Sufi orders, which had survived the Mongol invasions better than the formal religious establishment. The Sufis' emphasis on personal spirituality and their willingness to adapt to local customs made them effective missionaries among the Mongol elite. Through their efforts, the religion of the conquered gradually became the religion of the conquerors. The Mongol period also saw the emergence of new forms of Islamic thought and practice. The trauma of the invasions had shaken many Muslims' faith in traditional religious authorities, leading to a greater emphasis on personal religious experience. This period saw the rise of influential Sufi masters like Jalal ad-Din Rumi, whose poetry expressed the deepest spiritual truths in language of extraordinary beauty and power. Rumi's verses, written in the aftermath of the Mongol invasions, spoke to the universal human experience of loss and renewal. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vow 1,000 times. Come yet again. Come, come. The Mongol invasions also had the unintended effect of connecting the Islamic world more closely with other civilizations. The Mongol Empire, stretching from China to Eastern Europe, created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange. Islamic scholars gained access to Chinese innovations like printing and gunpowder, while Chinese and European ideas flowed into the Islamic world. In Central Asia and Persia, the Mongol period saw the emergence of a new synthesis of Islamic, Persian, and Mongol traditions. This cultural fusion would eventually give rise to the Timurid Renaissance of the 14th and 15th centuries, when rulers like Timur and his descendants patronized art, architecture, and scholarship on a magnificent scale. The city of Samarkand, rebuilt by Timur after its earlier destruction, became once again a center of Islamic civilization. The Registan, with its 3 magnificent madrasas, showcased a new architectural style that combined traditional Islamic elements with innovations borrowed from Chinese and Persian traditions. By the end of the 15th century, the Islamic world had not only recovered from the Mongol catastrophe, but had been transformed by it. New centers of power had emerged in Cairo, Granada, Samarkand, and Delhi. New forms of art, architecture, and literature had developed. Most importantly, new military technologies, particularly gunpowder weapons, had been mastered, setting the stage for the rise of the great Islamic empires of the early modern period. The Mongol invasions had been the greatest catastrophe in Islamic history, destroying cities, massacring populations, and bringing an end to the Abbasid Caliphate that had ruled for over 5 centuries. Yet from this destruction had come renewal. The Islamic world that emerged from the ashes of Baghdad was different from what had come before, more diverse, more adaptable, and ultimately more resilient. The age of the classical caliphate was over, but the age of the gunpowder empires was about to begin. On the morning of May 29th, 1453 CE, the thunderous roar of cannons shattered the dawn silence over Constantinople. For 53 days, the massive walls that had protected the Byzantine capital for over 1,000 years had withstood the Ottoman siege. But now, as Sultan Mehmed II's great guns pounded the ancient fortifications, the last remnant of the Roman Empire was about to fall. The young Sultan, only 21 years old, had staked his reputation on this audacious gamble. Constantinople was the greatest prize in the medieval world, a city that controlled the vital passage between Europe and Asia, between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. For over a century, Ottoman armies had conquered most of the Byzantine Empire, but the capital itself had remained unconquered, protected by its massive walls and the waters of the Golden Horn. Mehmed had prepared for this moment with meticulous care. He had assembled the largest army ever fielded by the Ottomans, 80,000 men supported by a fleet of over 400 ships. Most importantly, he had recruited Orban, a Hungarian engineer who had designed the largest cannons the world had ever seen. These massive bronze guns, some weighing over 17 tons, could hurl stone balls weighing 600 pounds against the city's walls. As the final assault began, Mehmed's Janissaries, the elite slave soldiers who formed the core of the Ottoman army, poured through the breaches in the walls. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, died fighting on the ramparts, his body so mutilated that it could only be identified by the purple boots he wore. By noon, the crescent banner of Islam flew over Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral that had been the centre of Eastern Christianity for nearly 1,000 years. Mehmed's conquest of Constantinople was more than just another military victory. It marked the emergence of a new kind of Islamic state. The Ottoman Empire that Mehmed was building was different from the Arab caliphates or the Persian dynasties that had preceded it. It was a gunpowder empire, one that combined traditional Islamic governance with new military technologies and administrative innovations borrowed from Byzantine and European models. The Ottomans had risen from humble beginnings as a small frontier principality in northwestern Anatolia. Founded by Osman I in the late 13th century, the Ottoman state had grown through a combination of military prowess, administrative efficiency, and religious tolerance. Unlike many Islamic dynasties, the Ottomans did not rely primarily on tribal or ethnic loyalties, but created institutions that could incorporate peoples of many different backgrounds. The key to Ottoman success was the dev-shirme system, a unique form of recruitment that transformed the empire's greatest potential weakness into its greatest strength. Every few years, Ottoman officials would travel through the Christian provinces of the empire, selecting the most promising young boys to be taken to Istanbul and converted to Islam. These boys, known as devshirme, would be given the finest education available and trained for careers in the military or civil service. The most talented of the devshirme became Janissaries, the elite infantry corps that formed the backbone of the Ottoman army. Armed with firearms and trained in disciplined formations, the Janissaries were superior to any military force of their time. Others became administrators, rising through the ranks of the Ottoman bureaucracy to positions of great power and influence. Many of the empire's greatest generals and grand viziers were products of the devshirme system. This system allowed the Ottomans to create a truly meritocratic government, where advancement was based on ability rather than birth. It also ensured the loyalty of the empire's elite, since the devshirme owed their positions entirely to the Sultan and had no independent power base. Most remarkably, it transformed potential enemies into the empire's most devoted servants, as Christian boys became the champions of Islamic expansion. Under Mehmed's successors, the Ottoman Empire continued to expand at an unprecedented rate. Selim I, known as the Grim, conquered the Mamluk Sultanate in 1517 CE, bringing Egypt, Syria, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina under Ottoman control. This conquest gave the Ottomans control over the pilgrimage routes to Mecca and allowed them to claim the title of caliph, making them the leaders of the entire Sunni Islamic world. but it was under Sulayman I, known in the West as the Magnificent, and in the Islamic world as the Lawgiver, that the Ottoman Empire reached its zenith. Ruling from 1520 to 1566 CE, Sulayman combined military genius with administrative brilliance and cultural patronage. His armies conquered Belgrade, Rhodes, and most of Hungary, while his navy dominated the Mediterranean and challenged European powers as far west as Spain. The Siege of Vienna in 1529 CE marked the high point of Ottoman expansion into Europe. Sulayman's army of 120,000 men laid siege to the Habsburg capital, coming closer than any Muslim force had ever come to conquering the heart of Christian Europe. Though the siege ultimately failed due to the early onset of winter and fierce Austrian resistance, it sent shockwaves throughout Europe and established the Ottomans as the dominant power in southeastern Europe. Sulayman's greatest achievement, however, was not military but legal. He oversaw a comprehensive reform of Ottoman law, creating the Kanun, a legal code that balanced Islamic Sharia law with the practical needs of governing a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. The Kanun established clear procedures for taxation, land tenure, and criminal justice, creating a system of government that was both efficient and relatively just by the standards of the time. The Ottoman approach to religious diversity was particularly innovative. Rather than forcing conversion or persecuting minorities, the Ottomans developed the millet system, which allowed different religious communities to govern themselves according to their own laws and customs. Christians, Jews, and other minorities were organised into separate millets, each headed by a religious leader who was responsible to the Sultan for his community's behaviour and tax payments. This system of religious autonomy was not merely pragmatic, but reflected genuine Ottoman commitment to tolerance and diversity. The Ottoman Empire became a refuge for Jews expelled from Spain in 1492, for Protestant refugees fleeing Catholic persecution, and for Orthodox Christians seeking protection from Catholic conversion efforts. The cosmopolitan character of Ottoman cities, where mosques, churches, and synagogues stood side by side, was a testament to this policy of inclusion. While the Ottomans were building their empire in the west, another great Islamic power was emerging in the east. In 1501 CE, a young Sufi master named Ismail declared himself Shah of Persia and established the Safavid dynasty. The Safavids were different from the Ottomans in crucial ways. They were Persian rather than Turkish, and most importantly, they were 12 Shia rather than Sunni Muslims. Shah Ismail's declaration of 12 Shia Islam as the official religion of Persia created a permanent religious divide in the Islamic world. For the first time since the early centuries of Islam, there were two major Islamic powers that considered each other heretical. This religious rivalry would shape Middle Eastern politics for centuries to come. The conflict between the Ottomans and Safavids came to a head at the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514. Sultan Selim I led a massive Ottoman army into Persia, where he faced Shah Ismail's forces on the plains of northwestern Iran. The battle was a decisive Ottoman victory, largely due to their superior use of firearms and artillery. The Safavids, who relied primarily on traditional cavalry tactics, were no match for Ottoman gunpowder weapons. Despite this defeat, the Safavids survived and eventually flourished under Shah Abbas I, who ruled from 1588 to 1629 CE. Abbas was a ruler of extraordinary ability who reformed the Safavid military, rebuilt the economy, and created one of the most beautiful capitals in the world at Isfahan. The city's magnificent squares, mosques and palaces earned it the nickname half the world, and it became a centre of Persian culture and Shia learning. The Safavid period saw a remarkable flowering of Persian art and culture. The carpets woven in Isfahan and Kashan became prized throughout the world for their beauty and craftsmanship. Persian miniature painting reached new heights of refinement and elegance. Poetry flourished under masters like Hafez, whose ghazals expressed the deepest emotions of the human heart in language of extraordinary beauty. The third great Islamic empire of this period emerged in India, where Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, established the Mughal dynasty in 1526 CE. Babur's victory at the Battle of Panipat, where his small army defeated a much larger Indian force through superior tactics and the use of firearms, marked the beginning of over 3 centuries of Mughal rule in the subcontinent. The Mughal Empire reached its zenith under Akbar the Great, who ruled from 1556 to 1605 CE. Akbar was one of history's most remarkable rulers, combining military genius with administrative brilliance and genuine religious tolerance. Unlike many Muslim conquerors, Akbar actively sought to accommodate the Hindu majority of his subjects, abolishing the jizya tax on non-Muslims and appointing Hindus to high positions in his government. Akbar's policy of religious tolerance went beyond mere pragmatism. He was genuinely interested in different religious traditions and established a house of worship where scholars from different faiths could debate theological questions. He even attempted to create a new syncretic religion called Din-i-Ilahi, which combined elements from Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, though this experiment was abandoned after his death. The Mughal period saw the creation of a distinctive Indo-Islamic culture that blended Persian, Turkish, and Indian elements. This synthesis was most visible in architecture, where Mughal builders created a new style that combined Islamic geometric patterns with Hindu decorative motifs. The Taj Mahal, built by Shah Jahan as a tomb for his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal, became the supreme expression of this Indo-Islamic architectural tradition. The 3 Gunpowder empires, Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal, dominated the Islamic world for over 2 centuries, but their success contained the seeds of their eventual decline. The very military innovations that had made them powerful gradually spread to their enemies, eroding their technological advantages. The vast bureaucracies they had created became increasingly corrupt and inefficient. Most importantly, they failed to adapt to the changing global economy, as European powers gained control of the sea routes that had once made the Islamic world wealthy. The first signs of decline appeared in the late 17th century. The Ottoman siege of Vienna in 1683 CE ended in catastrophic defeat, marking the beginning of a long Ottoman retreat from Europe. The Safavid Empire collapsed in 1722 CE, when Afghan invaders captured Isfahan and killed the last Safavid Shah. The Mughal Empire, though it survived longer, was increasingly challenged by European trading companies and regional powers. Yet even in decline, these empires left an indelible mark on world history. They had created new forms of government that balanced religious authority with practical administration. They had fostered remarkable cultural achievements in art, architecture, and literature. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that Islamic civilization could adapt and thrive in the modern world, incorporating new technologies and ideas while maintaining its essential character. The age of the Gunpowder empires had been a time of unprecedented Islamic power and cultural achievement. From the domes of Istanbul to the gardens of Isfahan to the palaces of Delhi, Islamic civilization had reached new heights of grandeur and sophistication. But the world was changing, and new challenges were emerging from across the seas. The European powers that had once cowered before Ottoman cannons were developing new technologies and new forms of organization that would soon challenge Islamic supremacy. The age of empire was ending, and the age of European expansion was about to begin. On July 1st, 1798 CE, the citizens of Alexandria awoke to an extraordinary sight. A fleet of 400 French ships had appeared on the horizon, carrying 36,000 soldiers and 167 scholars, scientists and artists. Leading this unprecedented expedition was Napoleon Bonaparte, the young general who had conquered much of Europe and now set his sights on the ancient land of the pharaohs. As Napoleon's army marched toward the pyramids, he addressed his soldiers with words that would echo through history, soldiers, from the summit of these pyramids, 40 centuries looked down upon you. The Battle of the Pyramids that followed was a massacre. The Mamluk cavalry, still fighting with medieval tactics, was annihilated by French artillery and disciplined infantry formations. In a single afternoon, French firepower had demonstrated the technological gulf that now separated Europe from the Islamic world. Napoleon's invasion of Egypt was more than a military campaign. It was a cultural shock that forced the Islamic world to confront a painful reality. The civilization that had once been the most advanced on earth had fallen behind. While Muslim scholars had been debating theological fine points, European scientists had unlocked the secrets of steam power, electricity, and industrial production. While Islamic armies still relied on traditional weapons and tactics, European forces had mastered the art of modern warfare. The French occupation of Egypt lasted only 3 years, but its impact was profound and lasting. Napoleon had brought with him not only soldiers, but also scholars who systematically studied Egyptian history, culture, and society. The description of Egypt published after the expedition's return introduced European readers to the wonders of Islamic civilization while also highlighting its current weaknesses. More importantly, the invasion exposed the Ottoman Empire's inability to defend one of its most important provinces. The Mamluks, who had ruled Egypt for centuries, were swept aside in a matter of weeks. The Ottoman Sultan Selim III could do nothing to prevent the French occupation or to expel the invaders. It was left to a combination of British naval power and local resistance to eventually drive the French from Egypt. The man who emerged from this chaos to rule Egypt was Muhammad Ali Pasha, an Albanian officer in the Ottoman army who possessed the vision and ruthlessness necessary to modernize his adopted country. Muhammad Ali understood that survival in the New World Order required more than military reform. It demanded a complete transformation of society, economy, and government. Muhammad Ali's modernization program was comprehensive and revolutionary. He established new schools that taught European languages and sciences alongside traditional Islamic subjects. He sent students to Europe to study engineering, medicine, and military science. He built factories to produce textiles, weapons, and other manufactured goods. Most importantly, he created a new army, trained and equipped according to European standards. The success of Muhammad Ali's reforms was demonstrated in the 1820s when his modernized Egyptian army conquered Sudan and intervened decisively in the Greek War of Independence. Egyptian forces proved superior not only to traditional Islamic armies, but even to Ottoman troops, forcing the European powers to intervene to prevent Muhammad Ali from overthrowing the Sultan himself. But Muhammad Ali's example also highlighted the challenges facing Islamic modernization. His reforms were imposed from above by an autocratic ruler and were funded by the exploitation of Egyptian peasants. The new schools and factories he built were staffed largely by European experts, creating a dependence on foreign knowledge and technology. Most problematically, his military modernization required the adoption of European organizational methods that conflicted with traditional Islamic concepts of authority and social organization. Similar challenges confronted reformers throughout the Islamic world. In the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Mahmud II attempted to modernize the military by destroying the Janissary Corps in 1826 CE and creating a new army based on European models. The Tanzimat reforms of the mid-19th century tried to create a more efficient and equitable system of government, guaranteeing equal rights to all Ottoman subjects, regardless of religion. These reforms achieved some success but also created new problems. The destruction of traditional institutions like the Janissaries eliminated sources of resistance to change, but also destroyed social structures that had provided stability for centuries. The promise of equality for all subjects was welcomed by Christian and Jewish minorities, but was resented by many Muslims who saw it as a betrayal of Islamic principles. The most serious challenge to Islamic modernization came from European colonial expansion. The Industrial Revolution had given European powers unprecedented military and economic advantages, which they used to establish control over much of the Islamic world. The French conquered Algeria in 1830 CE, after a brutal war that lasted 17 years. The British gradually extended their control over India, reducing the Mughal emperor to a powerless figurehead. The Russians advanced into Central Asia, conquering the ancient Islamic centers of Bukhara and Samarkand. The European colonial powers justified their expansion with claims that they were bringing civilization to backward peoples. They portrayed Islamic societies as stagnant and oppressive, in need of European guidance to enter the modern world. This colonial discourse had a profound impact on Muslim intellectuals, many of whom began to question their own traditions and to seek ways of reconciling Islam with modernity. The most influential of these reformist thinkers was Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, a charismatic intellectual who travelled throughout the Islamic world in the late 19th century, preaching the need for Muslim unity and modernization. Al-Afghani argued that Islam was not incompatible with modern science and rational thought, but that Muslims had allowed their religion to be corrupted by superstition and blind imitation of the past. Al-Afghani's student, Muhammad Abduh, became the Grand Mufti of Egypt and used his position to promote educational and legal reforms. Abduh argued that the Quran and Islamic law were flexible enough to accommodate modern needs, but that Muslims needed to return to the original sources of their religion and abandon the rigid interpretations that had developed over the centuries. In India, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan founded the Aligarh Muslim University and promoted the idea that Muslims needed to master Western science and technology while maintaining their religious identity. His educational philosophy influenced a generation of Muslim leaders who would play crucial roles in the independence movements of the 20th century. These reform movements faced fierce opposition from traditional religious authorities who saw modernization as a threat to Islamic authenticity. The tension between reformers and traditionalists created deep divisions within Islamic societies that persist to this day. Some Muslims embraced Western ideas and institutions, while others rejected them entirely. Still others sought to find a middle path that would allow them to benefit from modern knowledge while preserving their religious and cultural identity. The colonial period also saw the emergence of new forms of Islamic resistance. In Sudan, Muhammad Ahmad declared himself the Mahdi, the divinely guided leader who would restore Islamic purity and justice. His followers defeated British and Egyptian forces and established an independent Islamic state that lasted from 1885 to 1898 CE. In the Dutch East Indies, the 8-year war lasted from 1873 to 1904 CE, as the Acehnese fought to preserve their independence against Dutch colonial expansion. These resistance movements combined traditional Islamic concepts of jihad with modern organizational methods and weapons. They demonstrated that Islam could serve as a powerful force for anti-colonial struggle, inspiring Muslims to fight against foreign domination in the name of their faith. The climax of the colonial challenge came during World War I, when the Ottoman Empire made the fateful decision to join the Central Powers against Britain, France, and Russia. Sultan Mehmed V declared a jihad against the Entente powers, calling upon Muslims throughout the world to rise up against their colonial masters. The Ottoman entry into the war had mixed results. On the positive side, Ottoman forces achieved some remarkable victories, most notably at Gallipoli, where they defeated a major British and Anzac invasion force. The successful defence of the Dardanelles was led by Mustafa Kemal, a young officer who would later become known as Ataturk. But the war also brought disaster to the Ottoman Empire. British forces, aided by Arab allies, led by figures like Lawrence of Arabia, conquered much of the Arab provinces. The Sykes-Picot Agreement secretly divided the Ottoman territories between Britain and France, while the Balfour Declaration promised British support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The end of the war brought the complete collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 CE reduced the Ottoman state to a small rump territory in central Anatolia. while the rest of the empire was divided among the victorious powers. Istanbul itself was occupied by allied forces, and the Sultan became a powerless puppet. It was at this moment of supreme crisis that Mustafa Kemal emerged as the leader of Turkish resistance. Rejecting the Sultan's acceptance of defeat, Kemal organised a nationalist movement that fought a successful war of independence against Greek, Armenian, and Allied forces. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 CE recognised the independence of the new Turkish Republic and established Kemal as its first president. But Kemal's victory came at a price that shocked the Islamic world. In 1924 CE, he abolished the Ottoman Caliphate, ending an institution that had existed for over 1,300 years. The last caliph, Abdülmecid II, was sent into exile, and Turkey was declared a secular republic. For the first time since the death of Muhammad, there was no caliph to lead the Islamic community. Kemal's abolition of the caliphate was part of a comprehensive program of modernization that sought to transform Turkey into a European-style nation-state. He replaced Islamic law with European legal codes, adopted the Latin alphabet, granted women equal rights, and banned traditional Islamic dress in public institutions. His goal was to create a modern, secular, and Western-oriented Turkey that could compete with European powers on equal terms. The success of Kemal's reforms demonstrated that Islamic societies could indeed modernize and achieve independence from European domination. But his methods also raised profound questions about the relationship between Islam and modernity. Could Muslims preserve their religious identity while adopting Western institutions and values? Or did modernization necessarily require the abandonment of Islamic traditions? These questions became even more urgent as other parts of the Islamic world began to achieve independence. In the aftermath of World War I, new nation-states emerged from the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine, under British and French mandates. Each of these new states faced the challenge of creating modern institutions while maintaining some connection to their Islamic heritage. The colonial period had transformed the Islamic world in fundamental ways. Traditional political structures had been destroyed or weakened. New ideas about nationalism, democracy, and individual rights had been introduced. Modern education and communication had created new classes of intellectuals and professionals who thought differently about religion, society, and politics. But the colonial experience had also strengthened Islamic identity in important ways. The struggle against foreign domination had united Muslims across ethnic and sectarian lines. The encounter with Western ideas had forced Muslim thinkers to articulate more clearly what was distinctive about their own civilization. The challenge of modernity had inspired new forms of Islamic thought and practice that would shape the religion's future development. The colonial challenge had tested Islamic civilization as it had never been tested before. Traditional empires had collapsed, ancient institutions had been destroyed, and millions of Muslims had fallen under foreign rule. But from this crisis had emerged new forms of Islamic thought and organization that would shape the modern world. The age of European domination was ending, and the age of Islamic revival was about to begin. The question that remained was whether Muslims could create modern societies that were both authentically Islamic and genuinely contemporary. On March 3rd, 1924 CE, as the last Ottoman caliph boarded a train into exile from Istanbul, the Islamic world entered uncharted territory. For the first time in 13 centuries, there was no caliph to lead the global Muslim community. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's radical experiment in Turkey was being watched with fascination and horror throughout the Islamic world. Here was a Muslim nation that had chosen to embrace Western secularism completely, banning Islamic law, closing religious schools, and even prohibiting the call to prayer in Arabic. The debate over Turkey's path reflected a broader crisis facing the Islamic world in the 20th century. How could Muslims achieve independence and prosperity while remaining true to their religious heritage? Could Islamic principles be reconciled with modern democracy science, and technology? These questions became more urgent as the Islamic world began to emerge from colonial rule. The discovery of oil in the Arabian Peninsula in the 1930s transformed the region's economic prospects. The creation of Israel in 1948 CE created a permanent source of tension that would shape Middle Eastern politics for decades. The first major attempt to answer these questions came from Arab nationalism. Leaders like Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt promoted secular ideology that promised to unite all Arabs regardless of religious differences. Nasser's moment of triumph came in 1956 CE, when he successfully nationalised the Suez Canal and survived the subsequent invasion by Britain, France, and Israel. But the limitations of secular nationalism became apparent after the devastating Arab defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967 CE. The failure shattered the myth of Arab military superiority and discredited secular ideologies that had promised victory over Israel. Into this vacuum stepped a new generation of Islamic thinkers who argued that the solution lay not in imitating the West, but in returning to authentic Islamic principles. The most influential was Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian intellectual whose writings would inspire Islamic movements for decades. Qutb argued that the Islamic world's weakness stemmed from abandoning true Islamic governance. Modern Muslim societies had fallen into Jahiliyyah, the ignorance that had characterized pre-Islamic Arabia. The only solution was to establish truly Islamic states governed according to Sharia law. Qutb's ideas gained new relevance after the Iranian Revolution of 1979 CE. The overthrow of the Shah's secular, Western-backed regime and its replacement by an Islamic republic led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini demonstrated that Islamic movements could successfully challenge both domestic autocracy and foreign domination. The Iranian transformation was swift and shocking. In 1978, Iran had been a modernizing, Western-allied nation with growing women's rights and secular institutions. Within months, it had become a theocratic state where religious law governed every aspect of life. Women were forced to wear hijab, secular education was replaced with Islamic instruction, and harsh punishments were implemented for moral crimes. The speed of this transformation demonstrated that no society is immune to radical change. Khomeini's success inspired Islamic movements worldwide. The 1980s saw the emergence of new forms of Islamic activism that combined traditional religious appeals with modern organizational methods. The Afghan jihad against Soviet occupation became a rallying point, drawing volunteers from across the Islamic world. The Mujahideen's success in forcing Soviet withdrawal in 1989 CE seemed to validate the power of Islamic resistance. But the Afghan conflict had unintended consequences. The international network of Islamic fighters evolved into new organizations that continued the struggle against Western domination. The most notorious was Al-Qaeda, founded by Osama bin Laden. His organization's attacks culminated in September 11, 2001 CE, bringing the conflict between radical Islam and the West to unprecedented intensity. The 9/11 attacks and subsequent war on terror created new dynamics in the Islamic world. Military interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, combined with increased surveillance of Muslim communities in Western countries, reinforced narratives of Western hostility to Islam promoted by radical groups. The Arab Spring of 2010 to 2012 CE seemed to offer a new model for change. Beginning with a Tunisian street vendor's self-immolation protesting police corruption, popular uprisings spread across the Arab world, toppling dictatorships in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. Protesters' demands for democracy and human rights suggested the Islamic world was ready to embrace universal values while maintaining cultural identity. But the Arab Spring's promise was largely unfulfilled. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood's brief period in power ended with a military coup. In Syria, peaceful protests evolved into devastating civil war. In Libya and Yemen, the collapse of central authority led to ongoing conflicts. The failure created space for even more radical movements. The Islamic State emerged from post-invasion Iraq's chaos, proclaiming a new caliphate in 2014 CE and implementing extreme interpretations of Islamic law that shocked even many radical Muslims. ISIS's use of social media and spectacular violence captured global attention while distorting perceptions of Islam worldwide. Yet quieter but significant changes were occurring throughout the Islamic world. In countries like Turkey, Malaysia, and Indonesia, new models of Islamic governance emerged that combined democratic institutions with Islamic values. These societies demonstrated it was possible to be both modern and authentically Islamic. The rise of Islamic finance showed how traditional religious principles could be adapted to contemporary needs. Islamic banks operating according to Sharia principles have grown into a trillion-dollar industry, serving both Muslim and non-Muslim customers worldwide. Women's roles have been particularly dynamic. While some movements sought to restrict women's participation in public life, others argued for greater gender equality based on Islamic principles. Female scholars, activists, and political leaders throughout the Islamic world have challenged traditional interpretations and created new opportunities for advancement. The digital revolution has transformed how Muslims practice their faith. Online platforms allow believers to access religious guidance from scholars worldwide, while social media has created new forms of Islamic community that transcend national boundaries. But perhaps nowhere are the tensions between tradition and modernity more visible than in Europe today, where the largest Muslim migration in history has created unprecedented challenges. From the banlieues of Paris to the streets of London, from the mosques of Berlin to the communities of Stockholm, millions of Muslims now call Europe home. A continent whose Christian heritage, Enlightenment values, and secular institutions took centuries to develop. This demographic transformation threatens the very identity of European nations. France, the land of Voltaire and the Declaration of the Rights of Man, now struggles with Islamic demands for separate legal systems and restrictions on free speech. Britain, whose parliamentary democracy and common law traditions spread across the globe, faces pressure to accommodate Sharia courts and Islamic banking. Germany, rebuilt after World War II on principles of human dignity and equality, confronts communities that practice honour killings and forced marriages. The rise of parallel societies has created what some scholars call nations within nations. In cities like Bradford, Marseille and Berlin, entire neighbourhoods operate according to Islamic customs rather than European law. Women are pressured to wear hijab, girls are removed from school for arranged marriages, and apostates face threats and violence. These communities often reject integration, viewing European values as corrupt, and seeking instead to transform their host societies. The Iranian example serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly a nation's identity can be erased. In 1970s Iran, women wore miniskirts in Tehran's universities, alcohol flowed freely in restaurants, and Western music filled the airwaves. Persian culture, with its poetry, art and ancient traditions, flourished alongside modern institutions. Within a few short years, this rich civilization was buried under the black chador of Islamic fundamentalism. Today, European nations face a similar threat. As birth rates among native Europeans plummet, while Muslim populations grow exponentially, demographic projections suggest that several major European cities will have Muslim majorities within decades. The Gothic cathedrals of France, the Renaissance palaces of Italy, the medieval towns of Germany, all the architectural heritage that tells the story of European civilization, could become relics in societies governed by very different values. The attacks in Madrid, London, Paris, Nice and Brussels demonstrated that ideological struggles playing out across the Islamic world have found new battlegrounds in the heart of Europe. These events revealed not just the threat of terrorism, but the deeper challenge of communities that reject the fundamental values of their host societies. The question facing Europe is whether it will follow the path of Iran, allowing a determined minority to transform an entire civilization, or whether it will find the courage to defend the values and institutions that made it a beacon of freedom and progress for the world. The stakes could not be higher, for what is at risk is not just European identity, but the future of democratic civilization itself. The examples of Afghanistan under the Taliban, Iran under the Ayatollahs, and ISIS serve as warnings of what can happen when radical interpretations of Islam gain political power. The suppression of women's rights, persecution of minorities, destruction of cultural heritage, and imposition of harsh religious law represent a vision that stands in stark opposition to values that have defined modern civilization. Yet the story of Islam also offers hope. In Indonesia, Malaysia, and Turkey, Muslim-majority societies have demonstrated that Islam can coexist with democracy, pluralism, and modernity. The challenge for the 21st century is ensuring these moderate voices prevail over extremist interpretations that have brought suffering to the world. Contemporary Islamic civilization faces unprecedented challenges and opportunities. The global Muslim population of nearly 2 billion is younger and more educated than ever before. New technologies offer possibilities for development and progress that previous generations could not have imagined. The fundamental questions that have shaped the modern Islamic experience remain unresolved. How can Muslim societies balance religious authenticity with contemporary needs? How can they achieve prosperity and security while maintaining distinctive identity? How can they contribute to global civilization while remaining true to their values? From a cave in the Arabian desert to the digital age, Islam's journey spans 14 centuries of human history. Through conquest and defeat, golden ages and dark periods, the faith that began with one man's vision continues to shape nearly 2 billion lives. The future of Islam and global civilization may depend on whether Muslim communities can successfully integrate into diverse, pluralistic societies while maintaining their faith, or whether forces of radicalization and separation will continue to grow. The choices made by Muslims and non-Muslims alike in coming decades will determine whether Islam's next chapter will be one of peaceful coexistence and mutual enrichment, or continued conflict and division. The story continues to unfold, written by each new generation seeking to balance the eternal with the temporal, the sacred with the secular, in an ever-changing world. But in our interconnected world, the choices made by Muslims everywhere will affect not just their own communities, but the survival of the civilizations that have welcomed them. The sun never sets on the Islamic world, and as it rises each day, the call to prayer reminds the faithful that some truths transcend time itself. But the question remains whether those truths can coexist with the values that have made the modern world possible.